We have the fork wars. We have a culture that understands the importance of nodes and widespread enforcement of a protocol and its rules, unlike shitcoins, which couldn't care less about it. So like this node orientation in Bitcoin is critical to it not being a shitcoin. So spammers come in and they start trashing the blockchain and like exploding the UTXO set and making every block almost 4 megabytes, which was supposed to be a theoretical maximum we were never actually supposed to see because no one thought we would just fill it up with witness data. That all happening and us sort of going, oh, that sucks. I hope they stop. Like, or even worse than that, going, oh, it's all valid. Isn't this great? Different use cases like balkanization and all this stuff. Bitcoin is for enemies. All these mindless tropes. I'm like, this is ridiculous, guys. Like, it's an attack. They've stated it as an attack. When they came out and just went, I want to bloat the UTXO set because it's the worst thing you can do in Bitcoin.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Bitcoin Audible. I am Guy Swan, the guy who has read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. And this show is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin, the best place to plug your life into a Bitcoin standard, a literal financial suite of Bitcoin services. And then, of course, when you set up your automatic purchasing plan and automatic withdrawal, you want to send it to your cold card hardware wallet so that you know it is yours, you know it is safe, and you can get a discount with code Bitcoin Audible. The links and the details to our sponsors will be right in the show notes. We have got a fantastic show today. This is a interview that was long overdue. It was a conversation that we actually started at BitBlock Boom. I always love to hang out with Bitcoin Mechanic whenever I get the opportunity. I don't always agree with him, but we are very much aligned on principles, and it is always a very, very fun conversation, and super excited to bring him on because there's so much stuff to unpack about the increasing and concerning centralization in the mining ecosystem, as well as mining pools, and how essentially a hidden centralization has occurred that is basically the facade has been covered up. And we have a far bigger problem than it appears to be. And we get into exactly why. But then also one thing that I really wanted to hit with him, with all the drama and stuff about inscriptions and, the bear multi-sig stuff and stamps and all of these things, is what's the purpose of Bitcoin? Can we actually narrow this down? Does it make sense? Is it definable? And if so, why? What are the limitations to this conversation when, this is open and decentralized? Anybody can use it however they would like. So what does it mean to even try to understand and define what Bitcoin's purpose is, as well as just a ton of other fantastic things that I've been needing to talk to Bitcoin Mechanic about. Always fun. And I think you guys are going to really love this conversation. We had an absolute blast. Yeah, we will delay no longer. I think we've covered everything else. So with that, it's time to get into today's episode. The failure, hope, and the purpose of Bitcoin. A chat with Bitcoin Mechanic. Mechanic, welcome to the show, Mr. Mechanic. How are you doing? How are you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm feeling pretty good. Just taking every day as it comes in the Bitcoin space, as it just always does something surprising, and there's always a lot of perspectives going around, and there's just a lot of drama lately. There's always drama, actually.
So much. Yeah, it's drama never leaves Bitcoin. Like,
no,
there's never
it's a soap opera.
It is, especially Bitcoin Twitter. I've been kind of collecting a bunch of shit about all the stuff with Samurai and then Phoenix backing out of the US. And I increasingly, I can't put some of the pieces together. Like, I can't figure out exactly what the target is, or if there is anything broader to worry about aside from just kind of like the general overstepping of bounds that the Biden administration has been doing and trying to do for a while. But it feels like there's a lot of conversation about like attacking self-custody, which I don't see anything about that. What I'm seeing, like Jack Mallers had a point about that on the Money Matters podcast. But the thing that concerns me about it was the stipulation, which this was from the Biden administration, if I'm not mistaken, that you do not have to have control over the funds to be a money transmitter, to be classified as a money transmitter, which just begs the question, what the hell is a money transmitter? You know, like, what is that even... Like if you don't have to have control over the funds, what the hell do you have to have? Like, it seems like that would be the only thing to actually try to pinpoint exactly what's... Because everything aside from that is just data. It's just messaging.
Yeah. I think in Samurai's case, it just comes down to intention and trolling and, marketing. Like, I'm offering as candid as thought as possible on this stuff. I don't need to have any reservations by it. I'm not particularly worried because I don't live or work in America or any of that. I find it repellent and disgusting what's going on in America. I feel like they had, they forgot when there needs to be an amendment around money. Like, you have the freedom of speech and the right to bear arms and things like that. There just needed to be something like, yes, and you can do whatever you want with your money. If you pay $10,000 for someone to go and assassinate someone, yes, it's illegal to go and assassinate someone, but the $10,000 is nothing to do with it. That's just freedom of, so they're trying to use money to control people's behavior. And they're trying to say, well, we don't want people behaving badly. Like, we don't want you killing people or not paying taxes and all this stuff that's of debatable moral, sort of impertinence, I guess. But the point, they've taken it to the point where now they just can't. It's literally like if you tell someone, saying that you're going to commit a crime or, is not the same as the crime, right? Yeah. You don't get to limit the speech, right? Though I guess people would argue you do. So I don't know. I think what I kind of hope for in these situations, and I try not to give the game away too much here. I like it when they get hysterical and overreact, because then it backfires. What I don't like is when they're clever and methodical about it, which sadly is what they are, because then everyone gets boiling frog syndrome. So right now they have their arms around a lot of Bitcoin. Like, most of the mining, or at least in North America, is all very happy to comply with everything, particularly things like SOC compliance, which is just basically the worst idea possible in InfoSec. It's, we'll mine with you as a publicly traded company, but we've been told that we can only mine with SOC compliant pools. And becoming SOC compliant is something that Ocean considered for a little while, until we realized this is the worst possible idea. Like, imagine someone comes up to you and says, okay, I need to know who has all your passwords, how often you change them, what server they're stored in, which person has access to those servers, and this will help keep you safe. It's literally like the worst idea you could possibly have. It's not an endorsement of security through obscurity, but there is no perfect security. Like, I'm not ever going to be in a position where I'm like, hey, guy, I'm so confident in my security that this is where my cold card is. This is where the second key is. Like, because my security is perfect, right? Like,
can you please come to me on your computer, on your Dell laptop that you run your regulatory agency on?
Right. So I'm like, if you come to me asking those questions, I'm like, yeah, why do you want to know? Because do you want to rob me? Like, it sounds like you want to rob me. Like, so this is and it's such a LARP, right? Like, so all the publicly traded miners are like, oh yeah, we're not going near you unless you're SOC compliant. I'm like, we can't do that because we don't want to have every single security practice we take sitting on a hard drive in some government bureaucrat's like office somewhere. It's just, obviously don't do that. And it's just like the law is trying to go for an outcome. It's like climate communism shit as well. It's like everything you do, including flying the private jets to the conferences and all that stuff, is just going to backfire. Like, that's all government policy ever does. It doesn't just not help with the problem, it makes it worse. Not that I believe that climate is actually any sort of real problem anyway, but probably shouldn't get into that. But yeah, it's just I guess, back to that's basically my whole fear at the moment, is just boiling frog syndrome. I think there's so much KYC around. There's so little self-custody. When it comes to Lightning, 99% of people are using it, just relying on some third party, which, okay, sometimes that means you still get complete control over your funds, given the way the wallet's designed, but you still don't have any privacy. You still need permission to transact from some, you can have a situation where Phoenix or Async becomes the next big data platform, right? And it's like, we use this because Lightning's impossible any other way. There's no expectation of privacy. You need their permission to do anything. And if you're not even a part of the clique or cartel of Lightning service providers, your payments always fail. So it can just turn into email. Like, and already you see the start of that, right? Like in El Salvador, I made 1 million Lightning payments, but every single person was using not their own node. They were all using something. And this is something I feel really passionate about, because I've been trying for years to make it usable for people to actually run their own node and connect their own wallet to it. And, we've been back and forth the last few days getting you in that position too. So
just because I've been completely reliant on Phoenix, and recognize that it's the number of trade-offs that you have to deal with in the LSP model in general. Like, it is still a third party. What you essentially have is the ability to exit. It's kind of like using a bank, except that you have the ability to withdraw your funds no matter what the bank says. In a sense.
Definitely better. But
it's an improvement, but it carries a lot of the same problems of third parties with it.
It's rough, and I think we can do better. But I see people I had a chat with Matt Corallo on a Spaces the other day, and he was like, he smacked me down. He's like, you can't just give up on the idea that people are going to run Lightning nodes. It's not going to happen, right? We just have to make the LSP thing as transparent and non-custodial as possible. I'm like, I'm not giving up that fight. I'm sorry.
I disagree.
We have to do it. Like, even it might be a losing battle, like, because we have to fight complacency at the end of the day, and people will always go for what's easy and convenient. Like, Moon is amazing, right? If you forget everything, you just get an email with something when you type in some password you wrote, and they recover everything. But it's like, this is the most annoying thing. It completely defeats the point of Lightning. Like, unless you're very balanced with going to and from and to and from. If you're just constantly going in one direction, or even just usually going in one direction more than the other, you keep paying on-chain fees to use Lightning, which defeats the entire point of the exercise. And they're big transactions too, because they're enormous. Like, opening and closing Lightning channel is
just a normal UTXO.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's so counterproductive that I'm like, look, if just stay on chain, the fees aren't that bad unless you're going to use Lightning properly. But then you do have the hub and spoke model as well thing that kind of became a bit true. Like, Bitfinex is sort of running the Lightning network at the moment. Like, if you want to have a decent UX, you've got to use Bitfinex, and then you need 0.1 Bitcoin to open a channel with them, which is, at the time of this recording, that's $6,000 worth of Bitcoin to put in a Lightning channel. That's pretty scary to do if you don't know what you're doing. But that's the only way to have like a perfect UX. Then every payment will be like under 2 seconds. It will just work.
Yeah. It's, and part of me understands this. My personality is that I tend to go to like new fascinating project, from new fascinating project to new fascinating project when I kind of like figure it out, or I explored just enough of it that I feel like I got the hang of it, and then a new thing comes along, and I'm more likely to build like the beginning of it and then hate the finishing touches. And I think a lot of that happens in the developer space too. Like, the idea of giving up on nodes, or people running their own nodes, I think we haven't even given a good shake to making to working on the UX part of it. I feel like it's all been knee deep, like features and elements of the protocol and the client itself, rather than like going from which is usually managed or tackled by kind of like the business and market side of it, which almost always ends up with a third party because you have to fund it. But the difficult, like really pain in the ass stuff about how do you get a user to be able to run this in an almost no setup way. And I feel like that kind of like front facing, easy aesthetic, simple flow, user experience stuff is kind of put on the back burner for trying to build more into the foundation or making something that's more interesting. You know, it's not trim paint, it's building a new room on the house. But the UX problem is kind of like painting the trim. It's the really annoying, slow, tedious shit to put on the finishing touches. And I feel like we haven't even really done that. Like using the example of like the stuff that you and I have just been trying to use, set me up on my Start 9 officially that's going to be in a reliable way and not slow as ass over Tor, has been, the number of options is actually really low. You know, like there's tons of different little nodes and like all of these interfaces and all of this stuff, but to just connect to my phone, it's like use Tor. Use the, RPC Connect. We use the same shit we've been having forever. And it takes like 10 different steps. I get an error on the first one. It's just like that can be made easy. It's just a step that we keep skipping, I think.
Well, that's because we need to be realistic about what's involved in it. So I have a lot of like personal gripes about this entire issue because some of it just stems from ideology and some of it just stems from what people are fundamentally motivated to do. Yeah. So there is an incredible, like we're using Keat for this call right now. And there's a lot of people, like we joked about yesterday, there's a lot of people that will just shit all over Keat because it's not open source yet, even though, the pair stuff is all open source. But they will complain about it unironically from Twitter and Telegram and whatever else. And I'm like, can you not see the inconsistency in your own ideology here? Because you've elected to use something that you just need to use, even when it doesn't fit with your ideology, just because you can't not use it. Yeah. So I see like long rants about open sourcing stuff and being very pedantic about the definition of what that is, and usually disingenuously framing it. There's like a good long-standing antagonistic internal September thing is with Cold Card, right? Because they're not permissive. They're not permissively licensed. So people are like, oh, you're not open source, therefore I can't trust your software. I'm like, wait a minute, you can still read it and compile it yourself. Yeah,
that's got nothing to do with the trust issue. That's to do with a like you can't run a business with it. That's a completely different issue. That's not why it's not open, or the point of openness in the context of security.
I don't necessarily agree that like, having non-permissive license really protects you from anything. Like if Microsoft came along and stole everything Cold Card had done and produced an open, like you can sue them and go out of business as CoinKite. Like who are you to sue Microsoft? You're never going to get anywhere. Like
it's it's
system. Kind of, it's kind of like it's a false sense of security, but at the same time, it doesn't undermine anything. Like this idea that if you force license it, suddenly 10 million developers are all going to start contributing is like the biggest delusion I've ever heard of. So Ocean, where I work now, mining pool, the source code for the pool isn't available yet. It's essentially closed source. It makes zero difference to the miners because this is server-side software, right? So Signal is one of these things that people don't really trust because it's all open source, but you don't know what they're running on their servers. You don't know if they're using the source code that you see there. So it just requires trust. Client-side software, sure, I don't want to run, if I buy an Ant miner and it's sitting on my local area network and that's all closed source, that's a big problem, right? And they've had horrible bugs and stuff like remote exploits and stuff like that in Ant miner. not into telling people to run closed source stuff client side on their own home networks for good reason. Whereas server side stuff, we were attacked again as Ocean because where's the open source code for the pool? And I'm like, okay, this is Eligius V2. So Ocean is a relaunch of Luke's old pool that ran for 5 years. It got 20% of the network at one point. It was open source the entire time, and only 2 contributors ever existed, which is Jason and Luke. That's it. And, those are the 2 people working on it now, the 2, developers for the pool. No one ever contributes anything. And the idea that it somehow offers any security when what actually miners need from us is the ability to verify their payouts. And that's got nothing to do with the source code because we can just lie about that. Yeah. We can just invent fake miners on our Ocean thing and pretend that they did work that other people did. And verifying all that's not easy, but it's got nothing to do with our source code. So again, people get hung up on these things. And the reason I'm going off about this now, to come back to what you just spoke about, is because UX is the crux of it, but it's not fun. The only UX is about thinking about every single foot gun and every single non-technical person, how they can have a good experience. That's a job and it's a chore. It's not fun. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. When you come up with Bolt 14 for Lightning or whatever, it's fun. You're going to go on loads of podcasts. You're going to get loads of notoriety. You're going to get acclaim for it. Someone else has got to spend 5 years making it usable and doing this thankless work of making it so that grandma doesn't click on the wrong button. And no one really wants to do that in an open source context. Like, I'm not saying there aren't good open source things out there, but let's take like the world's most successful open source project ever, which is Bitcoin, right? It's still unusable. Like, you still need to put things like Sparrow or Spectre on top of it. And even those suck. Like, they're good, don't get me wrong, but like, how many years is it going to take us before we realize?
As much as I love stuff like Sparrow and Spectre, I don't usually recommend it to people. Like, if I gave that to like the typical person, even somebody who's just like knew a little bit about Bitcoin, like, I know they would freak out the second and ask them what address type. It's like, do you want SegWit native? Like, oh,
yeah, right, right, all that stuff. What derivation? The minute derivation path comes up, people are like, what? Like. And it's true, like, all this stuff is unusable. And I have this running joke, like a conversation in 2048, like, hey, we should make a genuinely good Bitcoin wallet. Like, it just, every year there's like a new one that is like, has a bunch of stuff that should obviously, there are still wallets around that don't let you do coin control. There are still wallets around that will only let you pick a fee category, like fast, medium, slow. I'm like, you won't even let me have a custom fee. Like, these wallets are still around, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I see all this stuff and I'm like, what's going to give us good UX? Good UX comes from private companies locking down their source code. Like Mac is good UX, right? Mm-hmm. And it's totally closed source and it's a for-profit driven thing. And again, like, people that complain and be militant about FOSS will do it from their iPhones and do it from their Mac operating system. Like, Linux is getting better, but the meme is is this the year of Linux on the desktop? It's never going to be the year of Linux on the desktop. It's just not going to happen because it's too user unfriendly, and it always requires a sacrifice of people learning how to use it and getting through it. Like, oh, the Wi-Fi doesn't work. I need to spend 4 hours figuring out how to make the Wi-Fi work. Like, no one is going to do that. So like, I'm countering my own point here with like what I'm saying about trying to get the world using Lightning properly. So I guess I'm just trying to be realistic in combination with, at least understand the problem we're up against when it comes to getting people to use tech in a sovereign way. It requires learning how to tie shoelaces, and that's not easy. But I think just rounding off the point, it's a battle that we can never afford to give up. So we just have to keep doing it. But that's really what I'm saying. It's just the effort people have to go to, and what's required of developers to start building good UX. It's thankless, and there needs to be some money involved for them to do it. Otherwise, they're just going to keep moving on to new cool feature. Like Core Lightning is a great example of that, right? Like, CL Boss was like the best thing ever. It was way better than Autopilot, and it just kind of got abandoned and stopped working. Spark was a great web UI for controlling your core Lightning node better than anything else, like Ride the Lightning or any of that stuff. Also abandoned, hasn't been updated since like 2020. Liquidity ads, which was sort of the open way of doing, Loop and Pool, which are those Lightning Labs services for getting liquidity in and out of Lightning channels. Mm-hmm. Liquidity ads are great. Also currently broken. That's supposed to be fixed in an upcoming release of CLN. Like, you name it, whatever the feature is in core Lightning that's like the real forward-thinking, amazing way to do things, it's someone stopped working on it because they went on to work on something else. It's super like Linux in 1992. Like, yeah, everything's great. All the ideology's in place. This is the future. See you in 2 decades. Like, and this is just like, it's something like that, right?
It's a problem. It's a huge problem with just open source in general because it's driven by people excited to build stuff, which, as you say, the UX side of it and the maintenance side of it is when it gets not exciting. Like, that's when that part of it dies. Like, there's a great book called For Fun and for Profit. And it's about, like, one of the things, like, towards like the first chapter or whatever, it talks about just the landscape, like, to think about open source development is like, look at the projects. Like 90% of them are just run by one dude, like one person, like one user. And the bulk of the work, even stuff that's like really successful, it just ends up, even the people who kind of like contribute or join are just kind of like there to learn or ask questions. And they end up being like support tickets for the one person who's already maintaining the entire project. And like, this is the never ending problem of open source. Like, Linux is a great example too, is that there are so many things that do simplify Linux and that get implemented, but they never seem to get enough momentum to be standardized or to be broadly accepted. There's no overarching, we're going to make the decision to always use this, even because of these trade-offs. So it's just a spider web kind of spaghetti bowl of options. And because nothing has like strong enough staying power, and then the entire environment changes so quickly that there's a new thing to respond to or adapt to before there's any really strong hold on the thing that we should have adopted fully to kind of get there. Like app images, like I have on the Linux machine that's sitting right here, I have like apps installed or used in like 4 or 5 different ways. There's not even like a set, like some of them I like do like a tar file and install them that way. So like a lot of them I have like this key is an app image. You know, I try to use app images when they're available, but I always can't get an app image. You know, it just, you know, installing stuff with Docker, God knows, it's a mess of stuff, but I think it's kind of inevitable. And the question is, how do you monetize and or go the last mile of doing the shit work?
I think you have to be realistic and just understand that, you know, it takes 50% of the work to get to 90% of the way finished. And then the last 10% is the remaining 50%.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not the last mile. It's probably much more work than the concept and the basic implementation. Because the trouble is edge cases, right? Like, this is why we can't have nice things, because one guy might press that button and that breaks everything. Like, this is why we have the justice mechanism in Lightning, right? Because someone might close a channel in an old state. No one ever does, and the incentive structure of it all keeps it pretty good together. But the fact that you need that it just makes everything so much worse. Like, when you first conceive of Lightning, you don't need to worry about stuff like that. But, well, maybe that's not the best example, actually. But yeah, I think it's just people are impatient. Like you say, there's always one gatekeeper for a product or a project. And then someone else comes along and says, this sucks, so I'm just going to make a new one. So you mentioned Docker, and you have Podman, and now Linux has got native containerization that everyone's going to be excited about, that will be better than Docker, but it will be worse for years. Yeah. So like, so it never ends, man. It's that XKCD with why are there 15 chat applications? We need to make one that covers everyone's use cases. Now there are 16 chat applications. Like,
Dude.
I say this after having keep pilling people, right? Like, they got Signal and they got Telegram and they got WhatsApp because they deal with Latin Americans and Europeans and and then Luke still wants me to use IRC. Like, I'm just like
fuck. Oh my god. That's honestly, I know maybe that's just me wanting desperately to have something that feels like a complete solution, but that's why I've kind of been all in on the Parastack stuff. Like Keat and everything, the simplification of this. Like all I can think is that if there was a pair link to connect to the stuff that I just did on my Start 9, it'd saved me an install and like just take everything, get rid of every other thing. Just like take the interface, like the commands, and give me a pair link to exchange those commands, and I have a remote wallet. I have something on my phone that's connecting to my Start 9, and it's no setup. I got somebody on this just the other day, and his reaction, like somebody who had been skeptical, was like, oh, okay, yeah, fine, I'll use Keat, and got up there, and we were chatting in a room in just a couple of seconds, and after a little bit, he was like, this was like way easier than Simplex. This was way easier. Oh, yeah. No complicated stuff. Like I'm actually impressed. So he finally basically took the step and then realized that it was just that easy. And I really feel like it's hugely undervalued for if we could just utilize that. And then the ability to not even have infrastructure costs for it. We're having a conversation right now, and we're Keat servers. This is all from like Macintosh pushes this from his laptop.
Yeah, and it's peer to peer. Like I was really compelled by. Yeah. I saw Paolo do a presentation on it like a couple of weeks ago, and he's right. Like I have very good internet, you have very good internet, but we're using something like Zoom where 1 billion people are using it at once, so they obviously limit how much you can give. Like they'll give you the bare minimum, because when you multiply that by the 1 million people in meetings right now, you can save a lot of money. But when it's peer to peer, it might as well just be top quality, right? Like, why not? This is going to be like, we're probably using like an order of magnitude more data to have this call than we would if we were using Zoom, because we don't need to throttle it like that. There's no point. We both have good internet, just use it. So like, because you've cut out all those middlemen, you get to have better quality. I really appreciate that about it. And I know they bought Keat, right? It wasn't their own thing, or they bought Hole Punch or whatever. What's the history there? Like, I heard that it was a thing that existed prior to Paolo and those guys, and they bought Keat, and maybe they made it Hole Punch compatible or something. I don't know.
Macintosh has been building and working on this. Like, I just watched a video of him 9 years ago working on Hypercore, which is kind of like the underlying protocol, but they're kind of renaming it as they send it to all this stuff. I don't know what they actually purchased, or maybe Paolo is talking, that's referencing Paolo buying Macintosh. You're like everything that he built on. Yeah. And I don't know if Math has been doing this by himself this whole time, but I'm pretty sure he's been working on this since like he showed a demonstration of how to do an instant connection and actually boot up a virtual machine from another, like boot up an operating system from another computer in 2014. And cool. So like he showed an example of doing that. And when I saw that, I was like, holy shit. And all of this stuff is basically extensions on top of it. And a lot of the stuff has been rebuilt multiple times because they keep making like really big updates to the actual protocol. Like he even said in like 2019, I think, they spent like 6 or 8 months trying to build a protocol, like make a protocol spec. And then in the process of doing that, when they were like almost done, they were like, holy shit, we can make this 10x better if we do this. And then they had to scrap all that work. So he thinks they're getting back around to making a protocol spec again. but they've continued to change it to make improvements. Then hole punch is like a library on top of it. Pair runtime is kind of the foundation of simplifying the everything in hole punch, and so that you can just kind of like boot it up and start going. It handles all the networking stuff, and all of that is open source. Is literally basically the UI on top of it, Keat, which isn't open source entirely right now, and just will be when they have the full release. So I don't really know the ownership or.
Yeah, sure. To what extent is Keat open? Is the source available for Keat? Like you can read it and review it?
I don't know. I mean, you can get an APK to download it.
Well, that's probably pre-compiled, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah,
I don't think so. I don't think so. I haven't really tried.
I'll defend them for doing that because they're going to be attacked by 1 million people for doing it. So someone's already pointing out the benefit of open sourcing and all that stuff. I just don't, as I said, I don't agree with the assertion these people make that if Keat was open source, suddenly it would be 1 million times more secure and they'd have all these developers helping them. Yeah. It just doesn't work like that. And when you're small and bootstrapping, it makes sense to operate in private. And again, the people that say, well, then I'm not going to trust you, will always do it from platforms where they're trusting those platforms. So to me, it's totally inconsistent and hypocritical. And, I know these people. Well, I know Paolo anyway, and I understand what his vision is for it, and I appreciate it. And I think it's good. I think that he's a misunderstood guy. I think I will even defend Tether. Which is like a controversial thing to do at the moment because Whitney Webb and Goodman from I can't remember I think it's Mark Goodwin. They're very they're going on a lot about dollarization of Bitcoin and how it's a problem, and I actually agree to some extent it is, but this is a thing I've seen. To me, again, it's all just it's all hypocritical. The only reason I can go hard into Bitcoin is because I have my fiat life totally together. I have everything I need to look after my family, to pay my insurance, to pay my property taxes, to pay my mortgage. I have it all just perfectly down. It's super privileged, super luxurious. That means I can go hard into Bitcoin. 90% of the world can't do that. They have the worst experience when it comes to fiat, and Tether gives them this chance to actually operate in that way that we just take for granted, right? So when people attack Tether, I'm always like, okay, but you have to cut up your credit card, you have to get rid of your bank account. You're one of the exceptions, right? We've spoken about it before because you actually live on a Bitcoin standard. But no one else does. And I wouldn't expect it of people. I just find it impractical. So my fiat life is so comfortable, dude. So when I see Venezuelans and people like that using Tether, I'm like, more power to you. No one's under the impression it's not centralized and ruggable and all that stuff. But it's not a crypto. It's not like a competition to Bitcoin where it's going to pump, where it's the next Bitcoin. It's literally not designed to do that. One day it could all disappear. Fair enough. Yeah. But no one's under any illusions otherwise. It's just, what's your alternative? The peso or the bolivar or something I'll use Tether. It's obvious. It's less restrictive. It's less prone to hyperinflate like my own local currency. So I'm much more concerned, as you know, about the shitcoinization of Bitcoin than I am the dollarization of Bitcoin.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. I guess we should probably get into that. I'm sure people are curious. And I've given my thoughts on it for a number of times. I still think my analogy is perfect, pooping in the park.
Well, everyone keeps using that. Francis used the pooping in a jacuzzi analogy yesterday.
Oh, really? Nice.
For the testnet attack. And what's his name? Greg, the fuck you Greg guy was, sorry for the language. He used the analogy for just the spam as pooping in a pool as well. A bunch of wizards come in and start pooping in the public pool. And you're just like, can you get out? And then their response is, we have a right to do it. We paid the admission. Like, we paid to come in to this pool.
Pooping is a valid activity in the pool.
Yeah. Like, and it's like valid in this sense. Like, this is the best psyop about the whole anti-spam thing, is just to say they're valid transactions. Like, by definition, in any protocol, not just Bitcoin, spam is always valid at the protocol level. It has to be. Otherwise, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, spam emails comply with the rules of the email protocol.
Yeah.
That's how spam works by definition.
The idea that
of course they're valid.
That's somehow the means to judge. Like,
right.
No, that's irrelevant about the judgment. And the whole thing, and the idea that it's censorship too. Like, the very conversation, like the whole apparatus of Bitcoin is just a giant filtering software. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. It just defines what is allowed and what is not to ensure that it continues to work and provides the monetary foundation that it is, you know?
Yeah. It's not understanding that the freedom must exist in a context where a particular activity can be done with complete liberty by the people that want to do it. That's never the same as eroding the boundaries around what the activity is to the point where anything becomes possible and it becomes useless for everything. Yeah. So like it's just like you're free to come in the pool and swim. Anyone. It doesn't matter what race or gender or age or any of that stuff. You're all free to do it. That doesn't mean you're free to come in here and start shitting in it. Because if you start doing that, it becomes unusable as a pool. That's not freedom anymore. That's just a mess. Right? And it's rules, not rulers. Right? Because the minute you go to rulers, that's people like that are just more powerful coming along and saying, well, we use this as a place to shit now. And there's nothing you can do about it. So that's what they've done on testnet. That's what LOP is. I don't know if you saw yesterday. Like the testnet's just ruined. Testnet's been under attack for like weeks anyway, because there's spammers are all competing with each other. Like before the halving, there was a lot of testing done about the runes, scam, which is Rodamore's thing. And Rodamore and the Taproot Wizards don't like each other. They're constantly competing. The scammers are all stabbing each other in the back, basically. But Lop, who's a Taproot wizard, was trying to undermine the testing for runes before, the last minute testing they were doing before launching on mainnet. So he did the time warp attack on testnet, which, if you don't know what the time warp attack is, it's, there's a timestamp in every block that gets mined. And there is no authoritative source of what the time is, right? It's one of those weird things in Bitcoin where we all just kind of work together. But if you deviate too far from what everyone is thinking the time is on their local node, your blocks will start to become invalid. So miners are incentivized not to drift too far away from what your clock says on the wall. But you can, I don't know what the limit is. I think you can get 2 hours away. Anything under that is okay. Yeah. But if you go over that, you start to your blocks are going to start getting rejected. So the time warp attack, at least as it relates to testnet, if there's a difficulty adjustment on testnet, if you wait 20 minutes or you publish the next block with a 20-minute in the future timestamp from the block just before the difficulty adjustment, it resets to 1, which means you can mine the next 2016 blocks in like 5 seconds, right? Because it's difficulty level 1. If you just point one S19J at testnet, you can mine a whole epoch, a whole difficulty epoch or difficulty cycles worth of blocks in like minutes. And that's too fast for anyone to do anything with. Nodes can't keep up with it. Like mempool space has a testnet explorer as well, and it's just constantly broken at the moment because it can't keep up.
Wait a second. Then there's scaling limitations at the base layer. I don't understand this. I just had a conversation with a bunch of big blockers, and that is just not the case, apparently.
Right. Well, these are all empty blocks anyway, because the whole point is they don't want to let any of the rival scammers get any of their transactions in the block. But unfortunately, like testnet this is just sociopathic behavior in my estimation. Like testnet's just a gentleman's agreement. Hey, we have this thing where there's no real cost to finding blocks on this thing, because difficulty is just always basically nothing.
There's no economic security. It's not even supposed to have economic value,
Right. That's why it works. Yeah. So like the attack, Lop's explicit statement around it was, I want them to fix the ability for me to break it like this. But the trouble is, if you do that, then it's not a testnet anymore. It has monetary value. Like it's going to, the difficulty will start doing what the real Bitcoin difficulty does. And then suddenly you don't want the testnet. Testnet's literally just for gentlemen to agree to create an environment where you can test stuff. And there's even been people saying, just make a new testnet if it bothers you that much. But it's a problem. Like if you want to test Lightning infrastructure, you need there to be other nodes on the testnet. You need it to have been established, and you need it for it to be like a shared common like good that we all just kind of go, this is useful. Let's use this. Let's not attack it. Like it doesn't enjoy the same benefit that Bitcoin mainnet does by having all this economic punishment if you try and do something bad on it. Testnet doesn't have any of that because it can't. Like the whole, if you structure it like that, then it becomes not a testnet anymore. It becomes a shitcoin, which like, and people like, don't worry about it, but I'm like, a shitcoin can get $1 billion in market cap in like 3 days. That could happen to testnet too. Like in the minute that happens, like it just, I don't want that. No one wants that. So it's just, can we all have this nice thing, please? And can you stop attacking it?
It makes it's so ridiculous. Like they do it to the main chain. They can't. It's like we're gonna make another park over here. We're not even gonna put grass in it or make anybody want to join in. And they still just like, oh, we're gonna shit over there too. God.
Yeah, it's just people like doing a thing where there's no economic disincentive for someone to come along and ruin it.
Yeah.
So it's like kids playing in a park. It's always a good analogy as a park, right? Because there's a public place with a set of unspoken rules. Mm-hmm. Like, so if it becomes like a homeless place where it's just full of tents and like used needles and human feces and stuff like that, that sucks. Like, yeah, they're homeless people, so we get why that kind of happens. But the point is, if there's like a weird dude that strolls into the kids' playground and isn't properly clothed and is clearly like off his head on drugs, it's like, dude, get out of here. Like you're ruining this like place that has a certain, it's not illegal for you to walk through it or anything like that, but get out. Like my 4-year-old is like, I don't feel comfortable with my 4-year-old on the swing when there's this like clearly like tweaking out meth head on the park bench 5 feet away from her. Like, just get out of here. Like, and it's just sociopathic to be like, yeah, that's freedom. That's not freedom. All that is just, that's a different kind of tyranny. And it's the tyranny of just complete disregard for any sort of voluntary structure. Like what makes life worth living is people observing and taking responsibility for their own behavior and making life better for other people around them and themselves. That's not, you shouldn't need to be forced to do that. It's like the smoking ban is like a great example of it. Like they make it illegal to smoke in public places and everyone's up in arms about it. I'm like, yeah, I wish it wasn't illegal too. But by the same token, I wish you guys hadn't needed that to be a law. I wish you'd have just decided upon yourselves, yeah, I don't smoke around other people because it's gross. Like they need to breathe air and I'm making the air smell like shit. I'm like, if you fart around other people, that's a social taboo. Like what? Smoking a cigarette's the same thing, man. Like go, just leave, do it of your own like good nature. It doesn't contravene libertarian principles. It's not tyranny. Tyranny is literally, I have to find the guy with the biggest muscles, who's probably the government, to stop people ruining my day. Like I have to, like these guys that my neighbors moved in, they're making an incredibly loud amount of noise. I've got kids that keep waking them up. Like now I need to exert force against them. I call the police. I make a noise complaint and the police show up here and confiscate their sound equipment and all that. This is all just competing forms of tyranny. Like the only way you can have freedom is for people to voluntarily go, yeah, I'm not going to make the life of people around me miserable, and regardless of the law, I'm just going to be kind. Like people can't wrap their head around the fact that not doing shitty things is a part of freedom, and it drives me nuts. Like when it comes to technical stuff, people can't draw lines, that's all. So like most people intuitively understand that observing social norms is not a limitation on your freedom, and you should just do it. So, but when it comes to technical stuff, people don't understand where those lines are. So that applies to testnet, just like I thought. Some people are like, oh, that's so funny, you've attacked it. And I'm like, no, it's just sociopathic behavior. But it also applies to, what's going on with the spam. There's another context in which it exists here. I think the example I used that I really enjoyed, like just coming up with the other day, is just like roads. You have the freedom, like roads is libertarian. Like the meme about libertarianism is always hinging on roads, right? Because everyone always has that knee-jerk reaction. What about the roads? Who's going to build the roads? But this is my point with it. A road is for cars, and I'm saying you have the freedom to drive. You should have the freedom to drive without a license plate or insurance. You should have that freedom. You don't. But ignoring that for the moment, let's maximize the freedom of what people can do with their own vehicles, right? They shouldn't need to meet arbitrary rules. Like, when was the last time you got this thing for your car? Like an MOT you have in the UK. Like, you need to just meet all these arbitrary standards. Like, but I'm saying it's still designed for cars. And this is the anti-spam justification I have, because you've designed Bitcoin for a certain type of activity, and saying this other type of activity is not what it's for and it's detrimental to the system, that's as limiting to people's freedom as saying we designed the road for the car. We're not saying you shouldn't be able to drive past this hour, or you shouldn't be able to go more than 200 meters, or your vehicle must be electric or something like that. We're saying it's not designed for boats. Like, you can flood the road and sail a boat down the road, and then no one will be able to drive on it anymore. Can you please not use it for that purpose? If you do, the freedom of drivers to drive is gone. And yes, you've exercised some sort of freedom, and it's a valid form of transport, right? But you've ruined a thing. You've made it impossible. And that's basically, like, why can't people draw that line? It's because it's technical. It's difficult to understand. So when they say, it's valid transactions, I'm like, yeah, of course they're valid transactions. And sailing a boat down a high street because it flooded is a valid mode of transport. Sure. But it's obviously not what the thing was designed for. And it's obviously making it really bad for everyone that expected to be able to use this thing. And we don't have freedom now. We have chaos, and we're back to, competing levels of mafia and government. I need to find some muscle guy with some big guns that's bigger than your guns to come and tell you can't sail your boat down here anymore. Yeah. And that's not freedom anymore. That's how you end up in these horrible positions with mediated violence. I don't know, man. That to me felt like a good analogy. And I don't know, just like there is no definition of spam that doesn't sometimes fit a real form of communication. And there is no line you can draw. Spam is valid at the protocol level. Fair enough. But everyone knows a Nigerian prince email versus, an email from their dad. Like, they are different. There's a metaphysical difference between the two things. So, if you want to fill up, megabyte after megabyte of cat JPEGs on the Bitcoin blockchain using fake, scripts with, taking advantage of the witness discount, I guess it is all valid, but you're kind of missing some sort of metaphysical property here around what Bitcoin is for. It's not for that. You're not supposed to be turning nodes into unpaid cloud storage, because they're not here for that. No one ran a node on that premise. Like, I can't wait to store a bunch of JPEGs for other people that are of no interest to me. Like, that's
slowly
abusive
and
behavior.
Expensively.
Right. It's just, there's a barbecue at the local park. I'm going to use it to cook up. Like, no, like, get your spoon and your heroin out of here. That's for like a family to cook some meat on one time. You're abusing the intention of why that thing is where it is. Like, get out of here. And it's just sociopathic. And it makes me I think the technical elements of it obfuscate all the intuitive, like, human elements of it. The way humans operate, the way we talk to one another, the things we expect from one another. The minute you get deep layers of technology involved, people can't make those same intuitions.
This show is brought to you by the Cold Card hardware wallet. My favorite setup, which I know I talk about a lot, is the Nunchuck wallet on mobile that just connects directly to, or just talks NFC whenever I need to sign. The Nunchuck does not hold my keys. It is securely on my Cold Card, not connected to the internet, not vulnerable to a phishing email or any malware or anything like that. If I ever need to send a transaction, I just create the transaction on my Nunchuck wallet, and I tap it to my cold card, I hit sign, I tap it again, and then off it goes. There is no easier interface and way of interacting that grants a higher level of security, in my opinion, than that right there. It's genuinely incredible to me that we even have this capability in the Bitcoin space. And CoinKite has just made an entire suite of fascinating security and just fun Bitcoin devices and hardware products, like the block clock. Just connect it to your node and have it show the Bitcoin price, have it show the block height, just right there on your desk in this really cool package. If you haven't checked out what they have to offer, you definitely need to. And when you go over there, do not forget that I have a 9% discount code. Bitcoin Audible, all one word, gets you 9% off. And you can go through the link in the show notes, or just remember the discount code, which is not hard. It's just the name of the show. You can go through the link in the show notes to go right there, or just go to the store, browse around, see what you want, get yourself a solid hardware wallet, experience the tap to send with a cold card hardware wallet. It's just kind of magical. And get notified for the Q1. I'm really stoked about my Cypherpunk BlackBerry, the new model that's going to be coming out. So check that out as well. Yeah, don't forget, 9% off. The link is right in the show notes. Go check them out. Yeah, we separate the technology from kind of like the social dynamic in a sense. But I think a lot of it too is not understanding where and how principles form. A free market, people talk about like the free market a lot, right? And it's so many people seem to not understand that a market can only actually exist within a set of rules. In the same way that the roads, if you have like rules of the roads, the point of like green, red, and yellow lights or whatever, the point of stoplights and stop signs it's not a form of tyranny. It's not censorship of like certain things. It's to literally make the roads work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't work if you don't have it. If you don't have some sort of a system of rules for how to behave on the road so that you can have interaction. You have to...
Well, that's it.
The design of the limit is what allows interaction to exist within it. It's the same thing like rules of a football game. There's no game if you don't have the rules.
Exactly. You can use the sporting analogy a lot, but fundamentally it just comes down to protocols. Like the English language is a protocol. It's a set of rules. And if we all abide by them, then we get to communicate. Yeah. If you want to be that stupid about freedom and say, I need words to mean whatever I want them to mean, so men can have periods and all this stuff, I'm like, no, that is not freedom. That is not self-expression. That is just undermining our ability to actually communicate and create.
It's destroying the protocol,
undermining
which
stuff.
Kills the communication capability. Like you're just mad at reality.
You don't want to comply with a set of rules, which is what a protocol is fundamentally. You don't want to comply with it. You want to break them, and you want to use them in a way that's unfamiliar to other people, which undermines the whole purpose of it. So Bitcoin's a system where we can move money around with a whole bunch of beautiful characteristics, and you want to use it in a way that it wasn't designed for. And unfortunately, a protocol is a useless thing for an individual. A protocol is a set of rules that's adopted en masse, and the more widely it gets adopted, the more useful it becomes. But the harder it is to change it, which is a feature, not a bug, right?
Yeah.
This is why you can have decentralization, because you have widespread enforcement of the rules of the protocol, and it's why it's such a pain in the butt trying to upgrade it and make fixes and stuff. But in the context of a protocol, if there are vandals that come along and use it and take advantage of the holes in it, that doesn't just degrade things for one person, it ruins it for everyone. That's the problem. So it's not socialism to want to stop these things from happening. It's capitalism. It's the desire to construct something where there was nothing. That's what it is. It's a giant skyscraper, and people want to deface it and write graffiti all over it and smash windows. I'm like, no, we need to have some sort of construction. We need to have positivity and motivation to move forward. And we need to stop people that want to burn stuff down and destroy it. Like the stereotypical anarchist, right? Not the philosophically sound anarchism, just the pissed off nihilist that wants to burn stuff down that other people have created.
Yeah.
Right. So it's you can
and they
trash
get their
the blockchain.
jollies on seeing how much it gets in other people's way too.
Yeah. And then when people call them out on it, to create ideological bump that says, no, you have no right to do anything about this. This is my freedom. And I'm like, no, you're just being an asshole.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing. You're just being an asshole. You don't deserve freedom, and you're not capable of having freedom because you're still acting like a 5-year-old. Like this is why we talk to kids. Like you don't treat kids as though they have free will, and you don't put them, if they make a massive mistake that causes a lot of damage, you don't hold them accountable the same way, because they can't handle the responsibility yet. So the minute you act in an irresponsible way, sorry, you don't get free will anymore. Like it doesn't work like that. Like you cannot have freedom without responsibility. You do not have the freedom to destroy Bitcoin because you obviously don't have the responsibility to shepherd it either. And it's not ready yet. It's still nascent. So you have to herd this thing. And anyone that goes, oh, if Bitcoin can't survive this, or if it can't survive that, then it's doomed. I'm like, tell that to every single developer that has to work on it and flesh out all the aspects of the ecosystem that we need for this thing to even be remotely plausible as a replacement for fiat. Like if everyone had that attitude, oh, Bitcoin's invincible, just leave it alone, it'll be fine. If everyone just had that attitude, it would be dead in a week. It's not going to work on whatever new version of Linux or Windows or whatever comes out. It's not going to work on Android 17 or whatever. It doesn't. You need to do basic just janitorial work to keep the thing alive. And there are going to be bugs, and you need to fix those bugs. And you can't have a lapsed, lazy attitude or to have an ideological objection to doing things that are just good. Like, I hate it. It drives me crazy. Like, I'm going to do something. No one will ever do anything good because it's not economically rational. People will only ever be assholes. Like, I cannot stand this. It's demonstrably not true.
Yeah.
And it's a complete bastardization of libertarian ideology. Like, you don't need to find some convoluted justification for why people will do good things. People don't want to wake up feeling like a terrible person. And creation feels good. So people are going to be creative and supportive and excellent to each other. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Whew. I don't know. You know more about libertarianism than I do. I don't even understand how to define an ideology in the current environment.
Yeah, I think in the context of, if Bitcoin can't survive this, then it should die. And I've probably used that in the past in certain contexts, but I think people misinterpret what that means and the fact that humans are a part of Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin isn't separated from us. We are the consequence of its incentives. So, like, the only reason Bitcoin is anti-fragile, the only reason it is quote-unquote decentralized and it routes around problems is because of how we react. Like, to say that Bitcoin will survive or it will ultimately win is to suggest that, not that, like, it's done or that we've completed, like, that will never be the case. Nothing is ever going to be done. Not any time in your entire life on anything that you ever work on will you ever reach the point where you're like, this is finished. We don't ever have to touch it anymore. It's going to work forever. That's simply not, that is a fairy tale. That's as much of a fairy tale as we can just scale infinitely without doing anything different, have big blocks forever, right? Terabyte blocks, 20 terabyte blocks, who cares? And to not recognize the trade-offs. This goes all the way back to the whole, it's not open source, I'm not going to use key that they post on Twitter or from, iOS or something. It's to recognize that there is no fairy tale solution. We can't get so hung up on our principles, which are a guide. They're a path. They're a direction to aim at. They're not something that you just either have or don't have, like a light switch. Like, I have a bunch of friends who are Bitcoin sovereign who couldn't do anything if they couldn't call me. You know? Like, they're not Bitcoin sovereign. They have a third party. They know enough that they could probably manage if like shit really hit the fan, but they would need help. And you know what I do? I tell them the other people to go to and ask for help. And like to not recognize LSP is another great example, is just this idea of trying to get the best of what is possible should always be our goal, is to move that next incremental step. There's never a point where, like what Matt Corallo said that you brought up at the beginning of this, is that we should give up on that and nobody's ever going to run their own node. It's like, well, you could have given up on having digital money and peer-to-peer cash and be your own bank 20 years ago. What would that have done for us? It's not going to be complete. You've got
I agree.
An infinite runway of shit to solve. The point is, are we going to aim in that direction and solve it? Or are we going to just throw our hands up and give up on the whole fucking reason for being alive? That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I think it's don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I love
perfect doesn't exist.
I love the implicit. I haven't drawn a line yet between moral relativism, which I despise, but also just being pragmatic and not just using it as an excuse to inaction, the fact that you can't make anything perfect. So Bitcoin's full of holes and problems, but it's a shining example of someone who said, hey, I can build something good enough that everyone will think is a waste of time because it's not perfect. So that was the total reaction Satoshi received. I love this element of Bitcoin's inception. He came along and said, I've got this system that I think works. And it incorporates, atom-backed hash cash and all this stuff and proof of work. And people just were like, you seem to think you've solved the Byzantine general's problem. Don't you know that's an unsolvable problem? And he's like, you're right. Because it isn't like I went around for years thinking Bitcoin solves the Byzantine general's problem. It doesn't. It just makes it something you can actually effectively root around well enough that it becomes something you can ignore.
Yeah.
That's all. And every single idealist and computer scientist went, well, this is a waste of time because you think you've solved a problem that can't be solved. It's like, yeah, I haven't solved it. I'm just telling you how to root around it.
Yeah.
And that's what Bitcoin does. Like, you can re-stitch the whole blockchain back from the Genesis block. You can totally mine empty blocks from the Genesis block and undo the entire chain and wipe it out. Because the Byzantine general problem isn't actually solved. But is anyone going to do that? Not in a million years. Yeah. So there you go. Like, that was a pragmatic, practical solution to a theoretical problem that can't be solved. And if all you care about is perfection, what do you end up with? The dollar again. Like, it's like, great.
That's
well done.
Great point. When you word it that way, is that Bitcoin isn't the perfect solution. It's the pragmatic trade-off to make the Byzantine general's problem not really a problem.
Exactly.
But it's not.
And it
doesn't fix it. It's not.
And it's the same with spam.
Sovereignty.
It's the same with spam.
Things. Yeah.
This is what we came up with against spam the entire time, because people keep saying you cannot fundamentally fix spam. And I'm like, no, you can't. Of course you can't. There will always be some spam. Yeah. But you never say, well, then just leave it. If your email provider did that, your email inbox would be completely unusable, because they take it upon themselves to fight spam as hard as possible. And even then, you still get some in your inbox. But imagine if you just told Gmail or Outlook or whatever, hey, I hope you guys realize spam isn't a solvable problem. They're all valid emails. So can you stop? Like, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to ignore your stupid ideology because I need you to have a usable product. And I don't think you realize quite what you have. So it's just pragmatism versus idealism. And like, I just think Satoshi was the ultimate pragmatist. Like, he just ignored everyone that's like, yeah, you can't invent perfect money. He's like, I can invent something that's like 8 orders of magnitude better than anything else. So here you go. Like, and like, to go back to what you're talking about with principles being a guide, you now have all these principles that guide us, but people don't know when they're leading us to a world in which we're further away from what those principles would have given us if we'd have ignored them. Like sometimes you have to, break eggs to make omelets, right? There are times when you do things that violate your principles because it's in service of what it is the principle was there to guide you towards in the first place. So that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Kind of like a spirit of the law, letter of the law sort of thing, you mean?
Yeah, right. Like I broke the law in order to exactly. Like the spirit of the law is what matters, not the letter. And it's great fun. Like there was that protest mechanism called working to rule, where you just deliberately protest against the system by pedantically following the rules within it, to the detriment of the people imposing it. So I think there was like that example in the Soviet Union where they were told to produce 15 tons of nails per year. So they made a giant 15-ton nail, and there's this photo of them all standing underneath it. And then they're like, well, we're not doing any work for another 360 days or something. We've done what you required.
That's hilarious.
Right. That's a perfect example of following the letter, not the spirit. So, like, go ahead, do that stuff if you want, and we can't have nice things. Like, people obviously have to read between the lines, and pedantry is just annoying. So, yeah, that's my overall point. People are just being overly idealistic. They're not paying attention to whether a thing is usable or not. Like, we have the fork wars. We have a culture that understands the importance of nodes and widespread enforcement of a protocol and its rules, unlike shitcoins, which couldn't care less about it. And I've been saying the only credible difference, the only thing that makes Bitcoin not a shitcoin is that there are widespread enforcement of its rules. And you don't have that in Ethereum, because you can't have that in Ethereum because the rules are too complicated and too resource intensive to enforce. It's like like I always say, it's like a language 1,000 times more complicated than English. It has more features, but no one can learn how to speak it. So it can be changed arbitrarily by the 5 people that can speak it. Yeah. That's how you butcher a protocol. That's how you make it centralized. So like this node orientation in Bitcoin is critical to it not being a shitcoin. So spammers come in and they start trashing the blockchain and like exploding the UTXO set and making every block almost 4 megabytes, which was supposed to be a theoretical maximum we were never actually supposed to see because no one thought we would just fill it up with witness data. Mm-hmm. That all happening and us sort of going, oh, that sucks, I hope they stop. Like, or even worse than that, going, oh, it's all valid, isn't this great? Different use cases like balkanization and all this stuff. Bitcoin is for enemies. All these mindless tropes. I'm like, this is ridiculous, guys. Like, it's an attack. They've stated it as an attack. When they came out and just went, I want to bloat the UTXO set because it's the worst thing you can do in Bitcoin. Yeah, and they came out and just said that.
I watched a thing with a Mike in Space.
Mike in Space, yeah.
Yeah, he was talking about like we found a way to make it more toxic, and he was so proud and so excited, and he just like went off. It's like, this is the worst way to use the data, and that's what we're going to switch to. And I'm just like, it just feels like going up and like smearing shit on somebody's porch or something, like doing like a flaming bag of shit and then just like being proud of it and like posting it. You know?
And what I can understand malice. I can get that. Like, I can understand like a nasty person coming and smearing shit on my front door. I can't understand the homeowner that somehow finds that to be something to celebrate, where they're like, well, that's an aspect of freedom. That's what I can't get. That to me is when you're completely divorced from your own intuition and your own morality. Mm-hmm. Where it's like The Clockwork Orange. I mean, that's a really messed up film generally, but where the guy's wife gets raped and the guy that rapes his wife, he like, instead of like being furious or any of those sort of primal instincts, wants to re-educate the guy, wants to analyze and understand why this rapist has the wrong mentality. It must be because of class oppression and all this just absolute ridiculous stuff. And it's like that. It's when you're that stupid and you've been that gaslit into, it's annoying. I'm saying you've been disrespected. You've been abused. There's a natural reaction to that. As a node runner, you're being absolutely shat on right now. Your node is doing stuff that you never signed up for. It's non-consensual. They've told you to your face it's an attack. And you're engaging in like subterfuge. Is that the word I want to say? Or just excusing and equivocation, I guess. Just mealy mouthed, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's good for this. And that's unacceptable to me. And I just find that to be, what was it Scott Adams said about the Pfizer shots, right? Where he's like, look, in retrospect, no one should have taken that vaccine, but everyone that didn't take it was just lucky because they had no real evidence to go.
Oh God, yes.
Right. He said this, and I'm like, in any other context, like it's literally someone runs up to you in the street with a glass of black liquid, hold a gun to your head and say, hey, drink this. And he's going, well, I drank it because there was no scientific data to show me that this was a dangerous thing to drink. I'm like, where's your intuition, dude? Like, you're being held at gunpoint to take something into your body against your will. By what standard would you ever not intuitively go, that doesn't seem like a good idea? Like, how are you ever going to fall for that? Like, it's basic street smart.
We have an epidemic of just destroyed common sense,
right?
Like of realizing that expert opinions are. Like it was actually Wendell Berry in a book I've been listening to. Said to live by expert opinion is to abandon living, and like the idea that experts are like to have an expert or whatever on some field and that there is some authority on your behavior or your decisions is insane. Like it's not like it should only ever be taken as a piece of information or as advice or whatever it is. But you're abandoning your entire process and your entire mechanism. Like they don't know you, your life, your situation. There's no such thing as a standardized life. And everybody is kind of operating as there is, as if there is, and that you can just kind of have like some expert opinion of like what is necessarily the way to do things.
I know. I couldn't agree more. This is exactly the best example I have of this is someone I know who had brain cancer when they were 6 years old, and they got over it and all that. But this boy, he drank coffee all day, every day. Because coffee is a really good way to self-medicate when you have a horrible issue like that. It will shrink the inflammation that occurs as a result. And what's a 6-year-old boy doing drinking 8 cups of coffee every day? I don't know. But the newspapers and the experts are going to tell you, not a good thing, don't do it. Right? So if you apply these like generic standards, like you say, there is no standardized human being. Like you can't do that. You have to take what's actually appropriate for you. And then while the experts tell you you're wrong, right? So every day there's a headline, drinking this much coffee is bad for you, or drinking 1 beer a week is good for you, or broccoli is bad for you. It's just ignore it all and stop. And actually, what is it you said? Like experts stop you from living life or something?
Yeah, to live by expert opinion is to abandon living. Like
that's precisely it. And it's my goal in life to not do that because I was raised that way. Atheist expert opinion, just trust the science was like the mantra of my like childhood. And I just realized I'm not aware of anything. I'm not making my own decisions and I'm keep ending up in bad situations because I keep listening to people that don't know what's appropriate for me because they can't.
Yeah. I want to talk about mining. This is something that you brought up when we were chatting at BitBlock Boom that I feel like we didn't really get to go. Oh, well, how's your time, by the way?
Yeah, it's great. Go for it.
I'll admit, like with the problems that I saw with mining and mining pools, they appear to be under the surface a lot worse than they look. And you were kind of digging into this, and this was really what kind of sparked which is funny, we haven't talked about it yet, but this was the spark like, oh shit, we really need to have a show on this. Break down for me what's happening there. I think Matt Corallo talked about this recently as well, actually, on an episode that I've been meaning to get to. But yeah, give me the rundown.
So people again are holding on to some cope and some ideology from years ago that no longer serves us today. What I mean by that is the 51% attack is one example of mining gone awry, right? It means one guy got too much hash rate and he used it against the network rather than in favor of it. And the cope around that, there's two levels of cope with it. I hope I remember to finish this point. So the first is the hash rate will generally accumulate at a pool, and the pool will be the one that has some sort of loose control, but they're not actually in charge of the physical machines. And if the pool ever does something malicious with all the hash rate, it sort of has this semi-control over, all the hash rate will just leave and go somewhere else. So why would the pool ever do it? And number two is, if it isn't a pool, if it's just one entity with half of the ASICs in the entire world mining on Bitcoin, why would they turn their ASICs into paperweights overnight by undermining the value of the very technology their ASICs are designed to be able to participate in? Why would they ever do that? So those are the two sort of theoretical reasons why no one should ever be afraid of miners getting too powerful, because their power is always better used in service of the network than against it. So the reason neither of those are particularly watertight is because, one, yes, we've seen examples of a pool getting too big and miners all fleeing. The problem with that is we are not a bunch of cypherpunks mining in our garage anymore. We are publicly traded, regulated entities in the United States doing what we're told. The idea that those guys can see a pool creep up above 40% and go, that's too much, and they just all switch to some small pool. The compliance, just to remain SOC compliant, that's months in the process. Like,
Tell me about SOC compliant. What is this?
I don't know.
And
I don't know much about it. It's just one of those things where if you're a miner and you want the regulators to leave you alone, you can say, hey, don't worry, we're mining with a SOC compliant pool, or they do it on our behalf, or you have to just be SOC compliant yourself. And then, like I said, it's the process of outlining every single thing you don't want other people to know about your business for the purpose of making things secure. Like, the idea is, like, if you're doing something really slapdash, like all the private keys are on some guy's laptop that sits in a library somewhere, like not good enough. The government will tell you got to do better. Amazing. But I mean,
who developed
that's
it?
Your security.
Like, where did it come from?
I don't know.
Don't know.
I shouldn't talk about it because I don't know enough about it. I just know that the minute we started as Ocean, we started saying to public miners, like, hey, do you want to come mine with us? The first question was always, are you SOC compliant? And then our initial response was like, we're not, but maybe we can do it. Maybe it's not too much of a lift. At first, I thought it was just one of these, like, pay $100,000 to get a piece of paper that says I can do now. I'm allowed to do a thing. Like, at first I thought it was that. I was like, all right, I'll pay the cartel his backhander to be allowed to be a North American entity. At first I thought it was that. Then when it turns out what they actually require, I'm like, no, this is just basic OPSEC 101. You don't do any of this stuff. This is a nightmare. So, like,
can you do a letter of the law, not spirit of the law thing, and send it all to them encrypted so that they can't read it?
Maybe.
It's all there.
But again,
I filled it out.
The trouble is, like, if you want to be a small, like when Runes came out as the latest incarnation of spam, we come up with a template a week later saying, here's how you do that. If you're SOC compliant, you want to keep your SOC compliance, again, it takes months, because you can't be a small, nimble team with like two guys working the back end that will be like, oh, there's this, or oh, there's a bug, or there's an accidental fork. We're going to change. You can't do stuff like that. If you're a giant regulated entity, you're not allowed. The SEC just straight up won't let you do these things. Like, so I don't know if it's the SEC. Sorry, maybe that's the wrong. But look, so back to the pools example. We have all this cope around it. Like, the idea that the average Bitcoin miner in 2014 and 2015 had the same set of values as a publicly traded entity like Marathon or Riot or CleanSpark, and they would act in the same way as a bunch of cypherpunks that would like do what's best for Bitcoin, is just a complete delusion. It's not true in any sense. And so what you have as a result of this really high hash rate is not the security you might think when you look at it, because they will just stay where they are, even if stuff that starts happening that's counter to the network, which is exactly what's happening. So if the blockchain is being flooded with garbage, they will pay no attention to that because they don't care about it. They're not doing what's in the best interest of Bitcoin long term. They're doing what's in the best interest of their quarterly earnings. because that's what they need to do. And they're doing what's in the interest of being allowed to operate by the United States government. None of those are naturally game theoretically aligning incentives with Bitcoin. It doesn't work like that. You can't say getting SOC compliance is good for Bitcoin. Like this freaking mantra, this is good for Bitcoin. There are things, believe it or not, that aren't good for Bitcoin. And boiling frog syndrome is real. So if everyone's buying their coins through KYC exchanges and leaving them on the exchange, or just buying the ETF, if miners are all beholden to red tape and working within narrowly defined parameters by the state, that's not security. That is not what people think it is at all. So, but to the other point I made, so I've made the point about, some of the cope around the attitude of miners. The other point is just, it comes down to what a miner in a pool might do in this. I don't know. No, I'm losing my train of thought with it. It's a bit difficult to explain. It will come back to me. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's just, that's it. Yeah. If you have a pool that is getting too large, back in the day, people would all run. Like maybe today they would do the same thing. If Foundry or Antpool ever suddenly got to 45% of the blocks being found, I think maybe there'd be enough public outcry around that to get an American publicly traded company to jump ship. Because they're like, all right, shareholders be damned, SOC compliance be damned. Bitcoin is going to half in value by tomorrow morning if there's a pool sitting at 45% of the hash rate. So I think they would actually jump ship. The trouble is that's never going to happen because they won't do that explicitly. Pools have seen
it won't be
other
obvious.
pools die.
Yeah.
Right. So right now you have this situation that Mononautical, who works for Mempool Space, has been exposing amazingly, where they've uncovered that half of the pools are all the same pool under the hood. They're just under different names. So that gives people, again, this false sense of security. The hash rate's really high, and I don't see any pool above 40%. First off, you only need between 30 and 40% to be really disruptive. You don't need 51% to do that attack. You only need that for it to be a guaranteed perpetual success. It's very different from just being able to create a lot of disruption. Second off, the idea that they will never do it because of economic incentives assumes there are no governments holding guns to people's heads, making them do economically irrational things. We know that's not reality.
Incentives come from many different places, and not just Bitcoin. Yeah.
Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I can make you do something economically irrational that doesn't make sense from the network's perspective. And this is the thing. We didn't count on this. We have all these, we act like Bitcoin exists in a vacuum, and someone will come along.
For a while it did. It doesn't anymore. Yeah.
Right. Spam is economic externality. Economic externality was always bad. We knew that. Why doesn't mining produce prime numbers or fold proteins or search for extraterrestrial life? Why don't we do useful work with our mining algorithm? Because that's economic externality. If you introduce those, you add another element of chaos into a system that needs to be predictable. Don't do it. That was why we always said prime coin and all these things are stupid, because Bitcoin's useless proof of work is a good thing. It's again, moneyness comes from being unable to be anything else. If you can eat it, it's not money. If you can drive it, it's not money. If you can do useful stuff with proof of work, you're not doing something that's just in service of the protocol.
And you think about it, like proof of work kind of is reliant on the fact that it's just proof of arbitrary work. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't work if you're getting something else out of it. Like it doesn't work to block spam if you're getting paid. If it costs you 10 cents to send a message, if you're getting paid 10 cents for something else.
Yes.
Like,
and
it's explicitly a cost. Like,
yes. So spam is an externality because otherwise you have no explanation. Why did someone just pay $500 in transaction fees to move one sat? Why would anyone do that? That doesn't make economic sense. It's not rational because there's a real world that exists outside of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin doesn't understand that real world because it can't. So that also applies, that ironically is why all of the intellectual property stuff like NFTs are all a waste of time on Bitcoin, because that's all external as well. So if your intellectual property was established in the blockchain, it can't enforce it, making NFTs a complete waste of time and a LARP. We all know that. If you violate your contractual obligations laid out in an NFT, that was put on the Bitcoin blockchain, you just have to sue that person, which is the same as if it had been an email. So it's a complete waste of time because Bitcoin can only enforce what's native to its ecosystem, but it can be affected by things outside of it. And spam is that. Spam is people paying absurdly high fees to move essentially no sats, usually at a discount too, because of the witness discount. Yeah. So the idea that economic transactions can compete with that only care about what's internal to Bitcoin is a lie. You can't do that. So the fact that miners are ignoring that and pools are ignoring that means there's an attack. People aren't registering the fact that it's an attack, and nothing is being done about it. Though, I mean, there is a movement behind it. I find it difficult to gauge the size and power of it because you never know with these things, and I'm so intimately involved with it. And Ocean became so connotated with it, even though it's kind of ironic because the whole point of Ocean is for miners to make their own templates and put whatever they like.
It's got nothing to do with it. It's just you made the option available for whoever. Like it's funny. Like I went to it just the other day, as we were talking about, and I still haven't moved everything over to it just because I'm waiting for my node to unroll. But it's hot. It's hot again, so I'm not really mining much, which is sad. But
good point.
Yeah, because I mean I use it to heat, and I don't want it to be blazing hot down here when I come down to work. But when I was setting it up, it was funny. It's like I thought there would be like a default template. I mean, I guess there is, but you put it right up in front that I have 3 options, and I can't remember which one I picked. To get details for, but it wasn't the totally open. I think there's like a middle of the road option. I can't remember exactly what the stipulations are for the templates that you guys have set up. And then I can also create my own. How does that work?
You can't yet.
You can't yet. Okay.
We just rolled out Lightning yesterday, and templates is the next thing.
Okay.
And I'm expecting us to be pretty quick with it. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Miners making their own templates is great. A lot of people already don't understand what that looks like. I think I've discussed this before, but it's worth sort of reiterating. Centralization can always offer something that decentralization can't, because it has that efficiency element to it. Mm-hmm. So like a pool like Mara, which is a bad example because I don't think they just do their own mining. They're not really representative of what general big pools are like.
Yeah.
But Foundry or Antpool can go out and sell block space at some sort of premium and say, hey, if you want your data in the blockchain, contact us privately and pay us thousands of dollars and we'll fill up a block with your stuff. And we can guarantee it gets in the chain within the next 2 or 3 hours. Like a decentralized pool of people making their own block templates can't offer that kind of service. Mm-hmm. So when you start going out of band, when people start going outside the mempool, you have this premium market show up for people that I mean, it already exists. Like mempool's transaction accelerator is a thing, right? Yeah. So for your stuck forced closed Lightning channels, you can use that if you want, but you're going outside the ecosystem and there's KYC involved suddenly because you're back in fiat land. Like, want to make a credit card payment to close a Lightning channel, you can do it. It's pretty gross. Like you'll feel dirty after you do it. But the point is, so with Ocean's blocks, what you're expecting is like this weird combo. So if there's censorship, real censorship, and the SOC compliant pools aren't allowed to put in transactions known to be Russian or Iranian or Palestinian or whatever it is, pick your sanctioned state.
Yeah.
Then Ocean miners are the ones that can put them in. But if there's a bunch of spam that needs a well-oiled API for a very streamlined process for getting stuff in the blockchain, that you go to the big regulated centralized pools for, until the SEC comes after them and says, hey, all of this spam is unregulated securities. You need to stop doing it. Then the only place you can put them in becomes Ocean too. So you have this sort of 2 ways it can That's go. Funny. And it's going to be a combo. So Ocean mining's decentralized. It's going to be full of people making their own templates, putting their own Lightning channel opens and closes inside or doing massive batch transactions where they consolidate loads of UTXOs from before. They mine for 5 years and they finally find a block that contains it. All of it pays 0 sats per byte because it doesn't need to pay any more than that. And every other miner splits rewards with you, and your crappy block that had no transaction fees in it is now part of your split. That sucks. I'm going to go to Foundry where I can have, like, they promised me in this centralized manner that we will absolutely cram in as much transaction fees into our templates as possible. You'll make more money. And I'm like, that's PayPal. That's how I see that. Why would I use Bitcoin? It's clunky and annoying and awkward. I'm just going to use PayPal to send money around. It's free. It's quick. Until you get kicked off the platform, then you see why Bitcoin is useful. So that's the way I see it. If you want to be a miner and you want to take advantage of centralization, it's good until it blows up in your face, and then you can't use it anymore. That's already the case. If you want to mine with Foundry, you need to meet their KYC requirements, which are heavy. And most people have given up. And the publicly traded companies like it. They actually prefer having a pool that does all that stuff because it takes heat off them. Yeah. So I think that you have this dichotomy. Ocean is going to be less efficient at maximizing transaction fee revenue, but it's also going to be the only place you can mine the more controversial transactions. And we're structured in such a way that we're going to say we don't know what goes on into the templates. Until the miner solves the block, we don't know what was in it. So Ocean can't turn around and say, it's not that we will allow you to put, this is how Stratum V2 works, which is kind of why it's just marketing hype rather than anything actually all that useful. Stratum V2 says, pool constructs template, miner requests permission to change and substitute transactions as it wants, and pool either grants or denies that permission. What Ocean's going to do is it's going to say to the miners, here's what needs to be in the Coinbase payout. Everything else we don't want to know about. Construct the block as you see fit. And this allows for trolling. People can mine empty blocks if they want. And this is just an artifact of decentralization. I think we can stop straight up empty blocks, but empty blocks are already a thing. And that's just a thing we have to get used to as part of the nature of, not all being in the same location. Part of the whole Byzantine general thing is like, the fact that you will have these empty blocks every now and again, because you just need to, I don't know, maybe that's more of an artifact just of mining firmware than anything else on a practical level. So yeah, I'm going over a lot of stuff here. I just think it's a double-edged sword. I think Ocean will win because it's the less fragile model. It just takes a long time and it's a slow burner. So explaining it to miners is a lot like explaining Bitcoin to, no coiners. It's just like, I know this thing's really complicated to understand, but trust me, it's better. You just need to lengthen your time horizon. That's how I feel about Ocean versus the Bitmain monolith. Like Bitmain is basically the entire mining industry except Foundry at this point. Like they make all the hardware, pretty much, with like a small exception for Watts Miner and like Avalons, and like there's a few also ran. But Bitmain, most of the people, I know more Watts Miner maxis on Ocean than I do in any other context, and still 90% of the machines pointed at Ocean are Bitmain.
Wow.
And that's the closed source firmware, garbage products, no competition, and they run the biggest pool, and they run a lot of the smaller pools too. We call them proxy pools. So Brains is now a proxy pool for Bitmain. And this goes back to that first thing where you said, like, lay it out. Yes, they went FPPS.
That.
So they went FPPS, which I haven't even gone into yet. But FPPS is just like bankroll miners. Miners don't want to deal with randomness of the blockchain, so pay them no matter what, and pocket the difference when you get lucky, and bankroll them when you get unlucky. And to take advantage of this, you need a big daddy to come along and say, all right, we'll bankroll it. Here's 10 million. You can dip into it when you need to, and it's also a loan. Like this is like the IMF situation for third world countries. Like it's like reminiscent of that. It's really bad.
It's basically mining through derivatives.
Yeah, I mean it's an insurance product. Miners are basically saying, just like, I don't want to have to deal with a week where we find 75% of the blocks we expected, because my power bill will then become unpayable. So like I think it's 10 pools are now part of this thing that has been seen using the same custodian, where the Coinbase payouts in the templates constructed by the pool have all gone to the same entity.
Do you know how much of the hash power they all represent?
Over 50%.
Wow.
Yeah, but again, the cope is, well, why would any of them attack it?
Yeah.
I'm like, Well, I don't rely. Like, I'm sorry. Like the Chinese government or the American government or someone can just come and point a gun at the head of the 2 or 3 people making the decisions here and make them do something crappy.
Yeah.
Like at some point, like, yeah, does the value of Bitcoin tank? Maybe. Is Michael Saylor gonna turn around? Or the ETF guy's gonna turn around and say, "Hey, you can't do that thing. It contravenes the cypherpunk principles." Or are they gonna do a rescue mission and say, "Don't worry, it's not that bad."
Yeah.
Like, and buy the dip themselves. They'll just, like, who cares? Something illegal happened. Putin wanted to buy a nuke. We censored the transaction from the blockchain. We got Antpool, we got Bitmain, we got Foundry to do it. Is Michael Saylor really going to go, that's against the rules of Bitcoin? Or is he going to protect the billions of dollars he's put into the thing and say, it's probably a good thing? Which is exactly what he did when they came after mining in America, when Elon was pulling all the environment FUD. Rather than go, ESG is a scam, fuck off. It was, don't worry, we'll demonstrate how compliant we can be. We will give you quarterly reports about how green our energy consumption is. Like, this is not how you win this at all. You have to stand up to these people trying to wrap their arms around you and contain this thing. If they're going to do that, like, and this is the thing, I don't think the price would tank. I think the people, if all of the UTXOs are in the hands of ETFs and Michael Saylors and people like that, and you have a very centralized ecosystem around mining, once those miners do something that isn't good for Bitcoin as we understand it, but totally complies with the normal rules and regulations that happen in the legacy financial system, why would the ETFs guys, or, you know, they'll circuit break all the ETF stuff. So if the price tanks 8%, that's it. Switches flip, no more trading. Michael Saylor's not. He's trying to find a big compromise, which is really just the tip. The sad thing is, it's not that the price tanks overnight. It's that it doesn't. It's that Bitcoin actually survives it. And again, they raise the temperature on the frogs, and it becomes even more regulated and captured. Like, how do you stop a protocol getting captured? Emails captured. Like, if you want to email people, you need to use one of the big data companies. Otherwise, you can't use the protocol. It's a permissioned layer that sits on top of an open, beautiful, harmonious, kumbaya protocol. Anyone can send an email, right? Except you can't. You can't email someone because they're all using Google, and Google has its own system that says you need to jump through all these hoops that we set for you to use it. Yeah. So you want to use Bitcoin, freedom, anyone can transact, except half the world is using a custodial wallet, which requires that your UTXOs don't be on this list. Like, we have all this stuff creeping in, and like, how do you resist it? You don't be naive, is my point. So it's all coming, and it's all up to people.
1 step back. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. I hope, because that would at least be progress. Yeah. I hope it's not. I hope we actually survive it in some way. Like, my ultimate fear, and the thing I'm slowly resigning to, is that Bitcoin could have been this great, and it ended up being that great, which is still better than not having it. But it's so disappointing and disillusioning that it could end up like that. Like, and you even have like fork war scenarios. Like 2017, we won because the UTXOs are mostly in the hands of cypherpunks. If the ETFs have the UTXOs, what happens with a hostile fork? What side gets dumped? Like, what side does the hash rate go to? Like, that's a terrifying scenario right now. I don't think we would win the fork wars in 2024 the way we resolutely won it in 2017. In 2017, it was SegWit 2x that was the final point of it. Like, Bcash died, and that was poorly executed anyway. But SegWit 2x had more sort of Western CEOs sort of pushing this thing down our throat, saying, we're going to force you to have bigger blocks, and we're gonna run this thing. Like, every Bitcoin company in the space basically supported it, like Coinbase and BitPay, and and they're still around, those companies, right? Mm-hmm. So, but then Bitfinex, to their credit, launched a futures market. It was
Bitfinex. It was? Mm-hmm. Okay, because I didn't remember who it was. I was talking with Patrick Smith on Anarchast, which we had a great conversation. We went for like 3 hours. And I just kind of laid out the alternative view against, like, he had Roger on recently, and they talked about hijacking Bitcoin and everything. And I could not remember who it was. I was like, was it Bitstamp, Bitfinex? Like, somebody launched futures, and futures basically put the nail in the coffin. Yeah.
Swan Bitcoin has the full suite of Bitcoin financial services.
You can instantly buy with your bank account or wire transfer any amount of Bitcoin up to $10 million worth. And you can easily set up what I have been doing for ages, which is an automatic purchase of Bitcoin on a weekly or monthly basis. You just pick your time frame and then automatically withdraw it to your cold storage. And still they have free withdrawals to self-custody, which I was sure would be gone by now. But you should always treat any custodian as a point of failure. And luckily, you won't have to go anywhere for all of the information and advice you need for why you should withdraw and how to do it safely, because Swan Bitcoin has all of the resources you need and will regularly remind you. About 80% or more of their customers automatically withdraw their coins. That is an amazing feat, if you ask me. Then they also have the Swan IRA if you have a traditional IRA and you want to get it allocated to Bitcoin. And there's so much more. With Swan Private, they have inheritance planning. You also have Swan business accounts, and you can even do Bitcoin as a part of your employee benefit plans. They have an advisory. They have the Swan Vault, a multi-sig service for those who want to have the benefits of holding the majority of their keys, but still also want to be able to rely on a trusted institution in the case of an emergency or a disaster. If you haven't started into Bitcoin yet, Swan is an amazing place to begin. Go to swan.com/guy. The link will be right there in the description. Again, that is swan.com/guy. And they will know that I sent you, and my beautiful face will be right there at the top of the page to greet you. I am a longtime user myself, and a huge thank you to Swan for supporting this show, and I definitely recommend you check them out.
That was it. And the way they structured the contract was perfect, because it meant that if there was any ambiguity about who won, it was Bitcoin real. It wasn't fake Bitcoin 2x. The way they structured that sort of gave it was literally like the terms of the bet that you had to place favored one side of the bet. Like, because you're talking about, it's not like two horses run and it doesn't make any difference how you word the contract. This was literally like market indication inside the legalese of the contract. So this, to sort of reference way back at the beginning of our conversation, this is why I defend Paolo and I defend Tether and I defend Bitfinex, because the hate they got for doing this was all from Bcashers and big blockers. And this account on Twitter came out called Bitfinext, who tried to imply that it was the next Mt. Gox and all that. And Tether is still there. It's still fine. There's been a bunch of stable coins that have collapsed since that didn't take anything like as much heat. And more to the point, this company has been kicked out of America. It's another one of a long list of Bitcoin-related companies where not just the company, but also the people aren't allowed in America, aren't allowed to do any dealings with Americans. And my heuristic tells me that means they're doing something right. That means that they're
that's something really funny. Like when I've talked to Paolo in the past, is that they have like a strict aversion to touching anything in America, and then like you kind of hear from Mark Goodwin and like the basically that whole thing is that this is like a CBDC, and they're trying to like take over stuff, and it's like, well, it's not American. You at least know that. Like they're so America averse. It's kind of crazy, you know?
I find it funny that they gloss over that, right?
Yeah.
Like, so this guy who's working with the CIA to turn Tether into a CBDC behind everyone's back is banned from America, and his company is not allowed to do any business there whatsoever. And they keep trying to shut the thing down, and they keep failing. I get that governments aren't monolithic. You can be working in cahoots with the CIA while the NSA hate you. Like, I get it, but like, it's just not like on a personal level. I'm like, that's not what's going on here. Tether is annoying because it's the US dollar without all of the control. The US dollar is a weapon against the people that use it. Tether ruins it because suddenly people can use it freely. So it's just basically the swan song of the whole fiat story is suddenly all the rules and restrictions fell apart that they tried to use to enforce with the dollar anyway. So the whole thing just became a free-for-all in this last 10 years before Bitcoin became the dominating money. But yeah, so back to that whole saga with like the UTXO control, everyone that was a cypherpunk, all the Bitcoiners, all dumped the shit fork and real Bitcoin became the real thing. We destroyed it in the market. So Bcash got destroyed in the market, and so did Segwit 2x. So I'm saying now, if everyone's buying through ETFs, and if Michael Saylor has hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, multiple percentage of the entire network. He's well over 1%, I think, at this point. Like, if these guys start owning too much of it, then you have to rely on them. And like, yes, the rules of Bitcoin are enforced by the nodes, but they're also enforced by the holders and owners of the UTXOs. And if the UTXOs are all in the wrong hands, then the rules are whatever those people say they are. That's not a comfortable situation. Like, people need to own their own UTXOs so that when fork wars can and do happen, like, there's precedent for it, the right side of it gets dumped on and the wrong side of it doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. So, or the reverse of that. So, you have hash rate, you have nodes, you have devs, you have operating systems like Start9, which we keep bringing up, and you have UTXO controllers. Like, these groups are all wildly out of alignment with each other, and everyone just keeps saying game theory to me. And whenever I'm like, there's a problem, everyone says, don't worry, Bitcoin's fine because game theory. I'm like, what? Like, the rules of the game are benefiting some people and not others, and they are moving in divergent directions.
Realize that we are playing the game, which means that we're aware of what's going on and we're making decisions within it. That's like saying that, like, game theory is that the better football team is going to win, but if the football team doesn't adjust to what the other team is doing, no, they're not. Like, that it's necessarily within the game,
Right. Yeah. So in my case, the most dissonant part of Bitcoin's ecosystem is miners and nodes, which it actually came down to in the fork wars in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. Nodes wanted SegWit, miners didn't. Like, for obvious reasons. Like, there was the crude example of ASIC boost being something that Jihan and Bitmain could only continue to do in private if SegWit would happen as a hard fork or not at all. Yeah. So now ASIC boost is still a thing, but it's over because you have to grind version bits, and that's why every block
I can't
looks
believe
weird
I forgot about that. I should have brought that up with Patrick Smith on Anarchast. Damn, I totally forgot that the only way that you could keep covert ASIC boost was to make SegWit a hard fork. That the soft fork method of implementing it killed their 15% private advantage. Damn.
Yes.
That was another good one. Forgot about that.
It's a huge point. And when Greg Maxwell reverse engineered an Antminer to figure that out, it just blew the lid off the whole thing. And then Bitmain lied about it. Of course, they're like, we wouldn't do that. How dare you accuse us of doing this thing that, if you look at our circuitry on our ASIC, is designed specifically for that one thing. We would never do that. Like, it's just, you've already been caught. Why even lie at this point? But anyway, like, so I don't know. This is like the big context to the whole thing, right? Like, where does it come down to in mining today? To me, I just have a lot of people that mine with Ocean. They just message me. They're like, yeah, great. I support what you guys are doing. I bought a miner and I'm going to mine with you guys. And then we have some people that switched over from other pools. And then you just have a lot of inertia and like these sort of shady backroom agreements between people that have sweetheart deals with some of the proxy pools. Like, there's a lot of smaller pools out there that are very popular among plebs that are totally not helping the fight at all. So you have like Brains, you have Lincoin, you have Luxor, and they're all part of that little club. And you also have like pools with a lot of proximity to Bitmain. So the F2 pool seems to be its own thing. Via BTC was kind of a partner project. I don't know how much it is anymore. Everything smaller than that. Like, if you're mining with these pools, you're creating an illusion of decentralization that isn't there. And that's worse than
just having it not be decentralized.
Yeah. It's like broken privacy protocol. Like, imagine if every time you used Tor, you were public.
You were
like, think about the things
feeding the information straight to the NSA or whatever.
Yeah. Like, when you use Facebook, you act a certain way because you know it's public. Like, but when you use Tor, you're like, oh, hey, I'll look at this like video on what Hillary Clinton was up to like 15 years ago. Like, I might do that on Tor, right? Like, so if we're like I'm looking at the pie chart right now. Ant pool 29%. Actually, let's zoom out. Let's do like a whole week. So Ant pool's at 20, Foundry's at 27%. Very comfortable place for it to be at. Like, that doesn't scare anyone, being just below 30%. Then you have Ant pool at 24.5%. But Ant Alpha, which is its lending and FPPS program to allow the smaller pools to offer miners what they like, which is FPPS. There seems to be 9 pools that are sort of part of that process. So Bitmain is the parent to all of those smaller pools. I always forget exactly what they are, but I think it was BTC.com, Poolin, SEC Pool, SBI Crypto, Brains, Luxor, and I think Binance Pool as well. F2 Pool has some other sort of proximity to Bitmain. It's not that. It's another thing, because there's also template construction. It's become obvious that one entity is constructing all of the ways these blocks eventually look. So I definitely know that's true of Brains. Anyone is welcome to come and trash me if I'm making mistakes here. This is really opaque. So I'm saying stuff here. Some of this is conjecture. And so some people can call me full of shit if they like. But all of this stuff is completely opaque by design anyway, which is really annoying because Ocean has been paying out way more than other pools consistently. And everyone's like, well, where are your numbers? I'm like, ours are public. We can't do any meaningful comparisons with everyone else because they hide it all. So I have to make all this conjecture, and people are like, you don't have proof. I'm like, I know I don't have proof, but I have pretty good evidence. Our biggest miner has told us privately over and over again in a way I can't repeat. I'm going to say it. I could get in trouble for this. I'm going to say it. Our biggest miner has said, we are making more money with you guys consistently, especially in high transaction fee environments, which is what we'd expect. Mm-hmm. We kind of don't want to tell everyone because this feels like our own advantage over other miners at the moment.
Nice.
That's what they've told us. Yeah. So I'm not supposed to say it, and I'm certainly not going to say who or what it is, but it's frustrating sitting there at this tiny 1.5 exahash, which is like 0.2% of the total network hash rate, with miners that are just absolutely laughing all the way to the bank. While everyone goes, Ocean doesn't include spam in some of its blocks, therefore you're making less money. I'm like, you have no idea how the payout mechanisms work on the other pools, and they don't want you to know because they're stealing left, right, and center. Yeah. And the idea that there's competition among the pools so no one would do it isn't really true when you look under the hood, because there's only really 2 giant megalithic pools. Foundry is its own thing, which is be a giant regulated entity in the United States, and then you mine with Foundry, because then they tick all those boxes. They do everything that you want. It goes worse than SOC compliance. In Canada, you pay twice the tax if you're a Bitcoin miner than if you're hash rate rental. And Foundry provides a hash rate rental service where you're no longer a Bitcoin miner, you're just rented hash rate. Then you pay 15% tax instead of 30% tax. Again, is that helping the Bitcoin network, having that loophole there that means you can only mine with one centralized pool that's also the biggest pool? Yeah. How is that helpful to anything? How is that cypherpunk? It's not. It's an illusion of security. And can you outmine them? No, because if you want to be a cypherpunk, you got to pay twice the tax because you can't comply with all that stuff. You can't meet the KYC. So again, it's just like if the government, economic externalities, if governments want to come along and say to miners, hey, we'll bail you out if you're green, we'll add an extra 10% onto all of your mining income. And you say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to work with you. Then you're underwater. If your margin is within 5% of, your electricity bill versus the sats you bring in, you can't afford to not take those government bailouts. It's like Tesla, right? Like you get the green bailouts and you run an economically unviable company. Yeah. But doesn't matter. You get carbon credits. So the whole thing is like, how can you sell a Tesla at 44 grand or whatever? It's like, well, because the money's coming from elsewhere. You're not, it's like, it's a rigged game.
You are subsidizing us already. You don't know it.
Right. Yeah. So the entire mining industry is super subsidized in perverse ways that have nothing to do with Bitcoin's security and only undermine it. But people are looking at crude metrics like what the total network hash rate is, and they're not understanding what the origin of it is and the nature of what it's being used for. So there's an attack going on the nodes that's apparently beneficial to miners, but not to the point where they can earn more mining the spam with a pool. The kind of pool that mines the spam, which is all of them, still pays less than Ocean, which rejects it in most of our templates, because we got 4 now. Ocean's sitting there rejecting spam because every single block we found has been from one template, which is pretty aggressively anti-spam. It doesn't get rid of op return completely. So the last wave of spam, the rune spam, that's all still in that template. But getting rid of op return is a very, very dicey conversation. That's like something we can talk about. But the point is, Ocean should have been paying less, and it wasn't. We got when we just finally hit 100% luck about a month ago. I tweeted out, "Here's what miners have earned," and it was around 112% above what our best guesses were to what other pools have been paying out. With Ocean, you look at a block, you look at your hash rate, you determine your split, and you go, "All right, I got paid fairly, or I didn't." With other pools, your payment has literally nothing to do with what happens in the blockchain, apart from everything, like combining all other pools. So they take the last 144 blocks and they pay you an average of what you should have got based on what's in those blocks, whether those blocks were found by the pool you're mining with or not, which is absurd because they're paying you money that doesn't exist, or they're paying you less than you deserve because your pool got really lucky yesterday and they only paid you for some of those blocks. This is FPPS. It basically means you get smooth, consistent payouts, but your payouts have nothing whatsoever to do with the blocks your pool actually finds. So if your pool goes unlucky and doesn't find a block today, you still get paid. Where does that money come from? Well, it comes from a day in which your pool was really lucky and it found more blocks. But it's a dynamic and noisy system, and transaction fee revenue is not consistent at all. So when Antpool via BTC found the halving block, which had like millions of dollars in transaction fees in it, what did their miners get? Nothing like. And also the other
they get in every block, probably.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, they got more than that because they can't afford to push it too hard. Yeah. But the weird thing is the other pools have to accommodate the overall higher fees that, the average fees per block went up because of that one block. So the other pools that didn't find it have to pay more because they're paying an average of all network blocks, not just their own. And this isn't well understood at all. Ocean's blocks have nothing to do with the rest of the network. You just get, if we find a block, you get your split of it. That's it. If we don't find a block, you get zero. Now that's a lot more dynamic and there's a lot less predictable. So people naturally are a bit more averse to it, but it's real. And it's verifiable. With the FPPS model, you can't confirm any of that stuff. You just have to take the pool's word for it. Here's our calculator, and they never hold true to it because anomalous transactions happen, and then they have to have some sort of. There's so much fudging and working and tweaking the numbers. Like
you when give them the ability to fudge, and they're going to fudge. And if you obscure what's actually happening behind the scenes, and then you put it in a situation where it's dependent on funding. Because you don't actually have the funds and you put it in a funding mechanism, well, you also have to have it consistent, which means you have to have a centralized block template. You have to know exactly what it is you're going to produce with that. Like, it's a heavy multi-layer centralization, and the more centralized it gets, the more people are just going to figure out how to abuse it. It's like saying there's not going to be like a house edge on, in a casino. It's like, no. There's always going to be one. They'll figure out how to make it. Yeah.
Completely agreed. And it's very riggable at the moment. And right now we just I'm in that infuriating position where you design a good product and people don't understand why they need it. And so I'm just frustrated and trying to explain to people, here's why this thing is good.
Yeah.
The only credible argument against it is that our hash rate's so low, that our block frequency is so low, and the variance creeps up as a result. So we can go a week still without finding a block, which is ruinous for some miners. But then we can go a week and find 4 blocks, and then everyone's had the best day of their life. So we need that's another thing. You can't just have more and more and more pools. A pool has to be of a certain size, because if it isn't, you're back to solo mining. Like if there's only you and 3 other guys in a pool and you barely have any hash rate, you're solo mining. The whole point of a pool is consistency of income. So, but FPPS takes consistency of an income to an insane degree where you have completely riggable, unverifiable stats, where you just have basically, I hope these guys aren't robbing me. And I thought the halving block should have exposed that. As ironic as it would have been, because the main $1 million transaction fee or whatever it was, if Ocean had mined that block, we wouldn't have included it. If the miner had been choosing the default template,
that's funny.
I think, and it was also deliberately crafted that way because it was a rune, but it was an inscription at the same time. So the actual, as far as I can tell, it was the wizards that made that transaction. I should know this. I find it hard to keep up with the details around spam, but It was deliberately created in such a way as that none of our templates would mine it. Because, as I said, the rune stuff is just a small amount of op return. And that makes it into knots, as defined by Knots' default policy since 2014. It's always allowed 42 bytes of op return. So when Samurai decided we were attacking them because they have op return size 46 bytes, and we were like, we never mentioned you or discussed you once in our entire launching of this product. We forgot you existed. We are certainly not like we didn't know how your whole thing worked, and we had no idea. We had no idea. I've gone into this on other podcasts, but it was a funny thing where we're like, "Oh, sorry, we didn't mean to do that." Like, and two of the 4 templates still let those OXTs in, but I doubt any of that's happening anymore because Samurai's infrastructure's all been seized and closed down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, to zoom out again, with the whole thing with mining it's just the illusion of security rather than the real thing, and I don't like that. And I think it's if enough UTXOs get into the wrong hands, if enough of miner income starts to become from arbitrary data storage, which is just abuse of nodes, and you'll just see nodes dropping off the network. If enough mining gets centralized, if people keep turning a blind eye to these growing, the scrambled eggs are going all solid into one lump, right? With centralization, the coagulation, I think it is. If people just keep turning a blind eye to that because number go up and, Bitcoin is for enemies and, and it's anti-fragile and all these like things we tell ourselves, if that carries on, no, I don't think we're in a very good spot at all. So I think it's on people to be active to try and correct these trends, because we're definitely moving in the wrong direction. Like there's been this idea that transaction fees will outprice the spam. And I was saying, I don't understand why that would be anyone's position, because we have objectively the most amount of spam we've ever had in the blockchain. There is more arbitrary data in the chain now than there was yesterday, than there was the day before. It's getting worse, not better. So there's no evidence behind the claim that someday transaction fees will price out spam. There's no evidence behind the claim that if
I'll push back on that, actually, because I think there's a degree of novelty that will just die. And a lot of people are also losing money on that garbage. And
that's true.
As long as there is not a market to produce, like they're not losing money on fees. What they are doing is they are selling it for more money than it costs. When that stops, which I think it's like they're constantly pushing to like try to find the new novel way of doing it. I don't think there's much of a market for it. Like I don't know how long it takes to kind of kill it though, is the problem. And what's the cost in the meantime? Like, I don't know, but I think there's an argument to be made that it runs itself out of capital to some degree.
It depends what you mean by it, because you can either be talking about a specific spam protocol or you can be talking about spam in general. In my opinion, I agree with you if you categorize it the first way. Like the Taproot wizards are dead. Like runes will be dead in a week. It's already probably dead. The problem is iteration and new spam. Like shitcoins just they have a very short life cycle, but they always come back. Like, so, I mean, I don't know how many iterations of it we see before people become intelligent and have common sense. Like, I think we might be waiting a long time. Like, again, this is all economically irrational behavior. Yeah. But like, this is why I think Bitcoin isn't destroyed by like some genius hacker that finds a bug in SHA-256 or something like that. It's destroyed by idiots, like just piling in en masse and not really caring about what they do. Like, oh yeah, I use Bitcoin. Like I've got a bunch of sats and ETH sitting in a Coinbase wallet. Like, no, you don't. You're not using Bitcoin, and you're hurting the overall system. Like, that's what happens, right? It's just you have in 2009, you have like 100% of the users of this are cypherpunks. In 2024, it's like 0.01% of the users of this are cypherpunks. Like, there's no way you can say, yeah, it's just as resilient now. Like, it's just not. Like, all of the development and all the decisions that happen as we go forward with soft forks and, how we push governments and the games we play, it's all downstream from our overall culture. Like, it has to be. Like, if we're cypherpunks, the way that the code gets written, the forks that happen are all going to be reminiscent of that. Yeah. If we're a bunch of scammers, if we're just shitcoiners that have moved into the Bitcoin ecosystem, then they will reflect that instead. There'll be things that are like OpCat, which is the new, like, we want OpCat, like Bitcoin Magazine pushing for it. Like, there's a computational cost to that is detrimental to nodes, but is advantageous towards people that want to play around and have fun. So, like, that's not a trade-off the cypherpunks would make, but it is a trade-off that idiots will make, and that sort of, you know, people that don't really have any respect for what Bitcoin can do for genuinely poverty-stricken people that need it. Like, it's, you know, San Francisco, fuck around and let's have a play and let's merge all the opcodes, and, you know, Enhance is 3 opcodes. Like, let's just merge them. Like, yeah, let's do it. It's time. No one said anything that's bad about them. I'm like, hold your horses, guys. Like, I know you're a Covenants fan, and I am too, but I'm also incredibly hesitant to just start messing around with this stuff. Cat's certainly a non-starter. Satoshi got rid of it, and I would like for it to stay gone. Yeah. But I mean, but again, like, if the culture is dominated by assholes and people that are ambivalent to this stuff, you can get a soft fork in pretty easily. Like, even SegWit, back with a higher signal to noise ratio, was like a tiny minority of us fighting to get that active, and just the rest of people not really paying attention. Yeah. And like, so, I mean, Taproot was even more so. And then if we're talking about getting Covenants in now, it's like you're a drop in the ocean of like these active Bitcoiners that really care about this stuff, that are paying attention to it, versus like 1 billion people who've heard of it, and 100 million of them who have got a wallet on their phone that use it to some extent, but have never heard of, you know, OpCTV or Op Check Sig from Stack. Like, how many El Salvadorans walking around with, you know, Wallet of Satoshi or Blink Wallet or whatever have heard of Check Sig from Stack? Like, how involved are they in it?
You know, it's interesting too, like talking about like the economic control, because, you know, going back to the SegWit thing, is that the futures market was the determining factor. And the benefit was that the power of the default is really high in Bitcoin because of how the protocol works. You know, you have to fork off to change the rules. You don't get to take all of that infrastructure with you. But if the value is considered, you know, sitting in the ETFs, and the Lightning node providers, the network, let's say they go KYC and they're all public companies too, well, then suddenly you do have all of that infrastructure. Suddenly the infrastructure is dependent on you rather than the other way around, because you just have an environment where it's easy to chokehold. But in the pushback against that is that, you know, the ETFs, if the cypherpunks are, you know, basically running Lightning, writing the code, building and developing all of the products and services, and the ETFs try to quote unquote fork off from that for whatever reason, and even the miners go with them, they don't have, their Lightning nodes are inactive. You know, like basically the tooling and stuff built on top of this can't be split in the same way that the base layer can.
Good point.
And another interesting dynamic there too is that we have something in a bad way, but that I think can actually be fixed just kind of with time and pushing the market in the right way, is that we need a more global Bitcoin. We have an extremely America-centric Bitcoin. And that really kind of happened after China banned mining. And one of the things that would actually prevent the ETFs from having enormous amounts of power over which one is the one that has the value at the end of this, which fork is the deciding fork, would be Korea having an ETF? Would be Japan having an ETF? Would be an ETF launching somewhere in Africa? You know what I mean? Like, it would be a global market, more distributed, but a phenomenal amount of the ownership is actually centralized in the US. Which means that the US market, especially if, a bunch of US retirement accounts are stuck in the ETFs, you're going to have basically a whole bunch of blindfolded people with decisions being decided by BlackRock, being the ultimate decider, so to speak.
Yeah.
Then we have a very America-centric Bitcoin, and that means that the American markets, and specifically the ETFs, especially currently, have a huge advantage by being able to essentially dictate the price or the value of any fork if we come to some sort of a contentious situation, and especially if they are going to, they become some degree of a deciding factor. And, if we had like futures markets and now everybody has both tokens, so to speak, they have the non-forked Bitcoin and then also whatever the fork is, let's say the ETFs are pushing one. Well, then, what's the stipulation? What's the speed? What decisions get made about who sells what and when? Do the ETFs then just kind of have like this unregulated thing, this kind of like baby toy that they just kind of like conjured out of nowhere that they can then go use to sell on some futures market or something? Like, do they take advantage of that and basically put as much economic pressure as possible? Or do they even, will they even care? Will they just use it to stop soft forks?
Yeah, there's so many scenarios. I don't take much comfort in a fork war scenario where there's like diversity of nation states that still have like their very regulated entities be the owners of a lot of UTXOs.
Mm-hmm.
But I still am not very worried about it for a slightly different reason. It's just that, like, as established with other protocols, I don't think Bitcoin gets neutered by forks at the protocol level. I think it always happens with permissioned layers that get built on top of it. So just like with email, it's still an open protocol, but you have to be inside the big data club to actually use it. So I think that can happen with UTXO ownership. It's Bitcoin is more hostile to that by nature of its design, but I still just think if you're going to want to use Bitcoin in some capacity, you're going to need to be in some club or some silo within that. And that sucks, but I think it's likely. So, like, it seems so absurd to think of these tiny LSPs as that, like Blink and Async, Phoenix Wallet. Like, it seems so crazy that they could be the next Google, right? Like, gatekeeping on that level. But that's actually what it would look like. It would just be some awful thing like Meta, like Facebook. It would be some monolith like that was just like, oh, yeah, this is how people, like Facebook, if you want to go to a marketplace, it's Facebook Marketplace. That's it. Like, at least in Canada anyway, eBay is dead. Craigslist is dead. It's all Facebook Marketplace. And I don't have a Facebook account, so I can't use it. Like, it's just, and I have to make it. I made a Facebook account just so I could go and buy a truck one time, and they just deleted the account. They're like, no, you're not a real Facebook user. Somehow it just went. Like, I don't know what it was they did wrong. So I see you could easily have a situation like that where you have silos for financial activity. It's like, oh, you just can't do this stuff. Like, you need, if you, like, even in El Salvador, it's kind of like that. If you want to use Chivo, well, you need an El Salvadoran phone number, right? And I'm sure getting an El Salvadoran phone number requires ID. Like, every time I try and buy a SIM card in any country, it's always like, where's your passport? So just all those levels of restriction to get you into the system, they're not nothing, right? It's the same with ISPs. Like, the internet makes us all equal and open, but you need a house, and then you need an internet connection, and then you need a utility bill, like a place for them to bill you, and like you need so just all these layers of permission and access we can't afford to be naive about them. Is basically what I think. But I'm way going off the point here. We've spoken for a long time. I think, I don't take too much of a degree of comfort in any of it, really. I think weirdly as it is to say, Satoshi still has like 1 million Bitcoins, and I think he's probably still alive. So if it ever got like down to the real like meat and potatoes of it, maybe he comes back and he dumps his coins on the right side of it. But like, I think if there was a fork for real, though, I think like the ETFs would, like you're going to have replay protection within it, just like Bitcoin Cash had and BSV didn't have. I think it would just be the ETFs. All the economic activity they engage in is on the Fed chain, the one that's like compliant and all that stuff. And the UTXOs on the other side, they just don't move. And they also have Foundry, and they have another, they have the American regulated mining industry agrees to move around the economic activity on the cooked version of Bitcoin, and they just freeze the other chain. And that's difficult. I don't really know how we'd resist that, but I also just, for some reason, intuitively, I just don't think that's the approach they'll take. So I don't know. I guess that's as good a place as any to round off.
Yeah. I do actually want to ask, just for fear of getting into another tangent, what other like technologies, scaling stuff, like what are the things that you're looking at, just kind of as a way to give the audience something to explore and to give me examples of shit to do shows on, for like, what are you interested in, and is it the same stuff that I'm interested in? I mean, we already talked about Keat and peer-to-peer stuff.
Oh yeah. So outside of Bitcoin?
No, inside of Bitcoin, outside of Bitcoin, just in general, what freedom technologies are you most interested in?
I'm very interested in firearms as a means of like.
Oh shit! This is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm British, so it was all kind of a revelation to me. Like, they're a real thing. Yeah. They're not just in movies, right? Guns are real. Like, I don't know. There's not a lot. Like, I have my sort of Satoshi moments, and I have my Ted Kaczynski moments, and I sort of oscillate between the two. But right now, I'm kind of feeling like all technology was a mistake, and it will always benefit the state disproportionately more than it will benefit the individual.
Oh shit!
Like so right now, I just like, if you can weaponize Bitcoin against people, then Bitcoin was a net negative. Like the internet was weaponized against us, even though it was supposed to liberate humanity. And then Snowden comes out and says, "Yeah, every conspiracy theory was true," and I'm like, oh. And then we went, we did that annoying thing where everyone's like, "You're a conspiracy theorist," to, "Oh yeah, everyone knows that." And there was never the outrage in the middle. Yeah. Like, I hate it. It always happens. So I don't know, man. I think like the motor car was liberating, and now they're all like digital and stuff, except if you buy that Toyota truck that doesn't have any computerized components in it at all. It's like a $10,000 truck. Have you seen that thing?
Yeah.
It's like, I love it. Or is it Honda? I can't remember. I think it was Toyota.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Well, yeah, so that's it. I think I would say that. Like, I'm constantly never going to give up the fight. I'm just not super optimistic. I want to make tech that I want Keat to succeed. I think it can. I don't think anyone ends up in jail over it. I think it's like BitTorrent, and that's how Paolo broke it down for me. He just said we're just taking the lessons from ancient peer-to-peer like concepts, and rather than do all this nonsense on top of like very complicated shit like matrix protocol and simplex, which you alluded to earlier, and all that stuff, it's like, no, just go back to distributed hash tables and make it really, really simple, and then we're all fine. And I think he might be right. So Keat's good. Keat's really good. I think it doesn't have the marketing and the community that Nostr has. I think there's sort of like Nostr is like, there's so much buzz around it and everyone loves it, but it's just nowhere near as intelligently designed, in my opinion. Like, and I wish Hole Punch had that same, excitement around it that Nostr does, but it's relatively dead when it comes to the buzz, but it's so much more intelligently like designed, and it has so much more potential, I think. Though they're both great. So Nostr is good as well. I don't mean to knock it. I think it's actually good. Keat, Hole Punch is amazing. If it does what I think it might, it's incredible. And
well, considering we've had this conversation this whole time over Keat without even thinking about it or having any hiccup of any sort, except for my trying to figure out how to freaking record on my computer.
Yeah, and that was fun. That took a while.
It did. We killed 30 minutes. Oh shit, yeah. I'll I'll just say, like, in kind of a contrarian, or give the other side of that thing, of your perspective, I guess. I am still an optimist. And I also think that the way technology has moved, like the direction it has progressed, isn't actually natural. I think it's a huge set of consequences of incentives on top of consequences of incentives on top of bad incentives. Like the further down you go, you have such a bad fundamental incentive structure that, like, every layer, every change that you get in layers on top of a bad system can only move so far when the foundation is stuck where it is. And what we are doing with Bitcoin is trying to create a new foundation, right? And I think it's completely unavoidable, inevitable, that as we build layers, the layers end up looking and responding to all of the incentives of the other foundation, because the other foundation is still bigger. And the other incentives are still the louder incentives. But that ultimately, like, most of what we think of as natural centralization isn't actually sustainable. You going back to the example you brought up with Tesla, is that's not that, like, that's a good example or whatever of like a platform or something like that, but just that how much of our market is actually built on bad price signals, is actually built on shit money, bad incentives, and is actually propped up through essentially a redistribution mechanism through an accounting trick that has no chance of surviving long term. And that's why I think things are going back, is why people like you, like me, and so much of the underlying culture shifts is seeing that I don't have any control over my car now. It's just this like platform centralized remote controlled device that they kind of give me a steering wheel for, just to placate me.
Right. It's not sovereign in the slightest. It's not, there's no, it's, I don't know. It's freedom by policy to some extent rather than liberating technology. It's, you pull the trigger in your handgun and it touches it completes a circuit which asks a computer whether or not your license is in date or something like that. It's just not,
basically.
It's not.
Oh my God, that's a great analogy for our world right now.
Yeah, it's technology, man. Yeah. Like it's an arms race, and you've got to keep. I know you've had Matt Hill on your show before, and he it was like a couple of years ago. You did a podcast with him, and it was mind blowing. You're just talking about just the fog of war and the just the nature of what we're up against, but just like trying to build these kinds of technology stacks that empower individuals that need to be used a certain way so that they don't backfire on us is a nightmare. Like Bitcoin is a CBDC waiting to happen if we're not careful. Like it's not a private thing, right? It's like you couldn't come up with something less private than Bitcoin if you wanted. Like, so like if you're not careful with it, like you're going to end up in shit. And there's not a lot of maturity in the privacy advocacy space within Bitcoin. Like it's really just like you have lots of criticisms of Wasabi, which was definitely a superior thing to Samurai. And you have Yuval, who's like one of the creators of the Wabi Sabi protocol. And he's, pretty bent out of shape over how Wasabi looks now. I'm personally a fan of Wasabi because it's, I'm good friends with the guys that make it. Mm-hmm. And I really believe in what they're doing and who they are as people. And I think it's a good product. But even things like Tor are like nowhere near as good as you might think. Like I know what the unmasking process for Tor looks like now. I had someone run me through that was like, here's how you unmask Tor users. And it's frightening when you look at it because you open up Tor and you're like, yeah, I'm solid. Like no one can screw with me unless I'm like making the next Silk Road. I'm solid here. It's not as watertight as you think. Like Tor is super efficient. Like if you wanted to make Tor like bulletproof, you'd have to You have to make it like way less efficient. You have to make it so that everything you download, 40 other people download at the same time. And then you bury yourself in noise and it becomes impossible to correlate stuff.
Yeah.
But that would make it even worse than it already is. And
it's already borderline unusable for shit.
Right. But it's the juxtaposition of efficiency and fragility. So that's what you said that I wanted to just riff on, that I really agree with. It's every single one of these like irrational market phenomena that we see, and absurd behavior that shouldn't be happening. It all comes as a result of some sort of central funnel, and it's like right down to the base level of the economy. Like every house in where I live is just like 1.8 million, and it's garbage and absolute crap. This is because people borrow money and buy houses, and then you try and outcompete each other, and you just force it up and up and up. It's all just nonsense, and we know it's all going to collapse, and it's annoying, and you have to play that game, but it's not going to last. But it comes as a result of a centralized economic planning model thing that just it can't last. It's not going to last. We know it's falling apart. So it's just, but at the same time, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent, right? So you do have to position yourself intelligently within it. I seem to have done all right. I'm pretty happy with where I am. But it's what a ridiculous world. What a ridiculous thing. Like I don't know how else to put it. I'm constantly like feeling buried by I cannot even fathom this or process it. And everyone else is walking around
of all things lately.
Yeah, I can't deal with it, man. Like all the institutions, like transitioning to a low trust society has been horrible. Like growing up being like, oh, my school told me this is true, and you can drink the water, and there's no such thing as chemtrails, and the icebergs are slowly melting. Like all this stuff is just, you see it all, and you're like, yeah, there's some people I can trust, with some things that I can't figure out for myself. I'm 7 years old, and I trust my teacher. Like it's all gone because of COVID, and now I can't believe anything anymore. I don't even believe triangles have 3 sides. Like that's a lie.
Sure?
Like that's
a sure that's bullshit.
Like,
oh shit. Well,
so I know Bitcoin fairly well, and I feel comfortable opining on it, and like that I can steer it in a good direction to play my little role, stewarding what part of it I can steward. And even then, I keep zooming out and going, wait a minute, what's a good idea here? Keep this in the forest for the trees. Like, it's, I don't know, doing my best, guy. That's all I can say.
Well, I appreciate it, dude. I appreciate it. And I always love our fucking conversations, man. It's a blast. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on and joining me. And, no, we'll leave that for another time. Actually. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. Dude, thank you for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah. I'm looking forward to running into you at a conference soon. It's always fun.
Always, man. All right. Later.
See ya.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. I know you did. Obviously you did. And if you want to check out Ocean Mining, which I just started directing my miners to Ocean as well. Because I just think this is the biggest concern. I mean, not that I have any hash power to speak of, like I'm helping, but I guess I'm doing my part. I'm doing my, 100 terahashes or so, attempt to do my part in the solution to this problem. But like Bitcoin Mechanic said, this is about the long game. This is the tortoise, not the hare. And just keep talking about this problem and making people aware of it and making people understand that you have to make the move. We have to respond to this. So if you're looking for any details, I will have the link to that in the show notes. It's ocean.xyz, I believe. I'll confirm and get it in the show notes. And obviously, if you want to follow Bitcoin Mechanic on Nostr or Twitter, whatever it is, we will have all the links there as well. And of course, don't forget to check out, if you're listening to this episode, don't forget to check out the YouTube channel, because all of our interviews now are in video. So if you want to see us having this conversation and see the many other things that we have with AI Unchained, with the Devs Who Can't Code series, with Shitcoin Insider, which is still hanging on by a thread, but we have some ideas in the works for it that have just been kind of on the back burner while we work on a more important project that I'm really excited to show you guys very, very soon, actually. So stay tuned for that. But don't forget to follow me on YouTube and Rumble. We are publishing up there quite a bit. And yes, just so much more to come. So stay tuned. Do not forget to subscribe. Do not forget to share this show out with everybody that you know, everybody who needs to understand the importance and value of Bitcoin. That's what we are here for. That is what Bitcoin Audible does. And that's why Guy Swan is doing what he does. So thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Swan and CoinKite for making the show possible and helping to bring it to you. And with that, I am out. Until next time, take it easy, guys.